a difficult, unwanted breakup has recently occurred in your life. Are you still in love with your partner? Invite you to take part in a study involving pain control in the brain. Volunteers were simple to come by in a city of 8 million people. The one thing we did was a little bit controversial, though. A photo of the individual who dumped them was required. We had a purpose in taking these pictures. With the help of MRI scans, we were able to capture a moment in time in the brain when people were remembering how they felt about the person they had fallen in love with but had been unable to get back together with. Besides, we were curious as to whether or not the brain handles emotional pain in a manner comparable to that which it employs while dealing with physical pain. We also administered a cup of coffee like heat on their arms in order to get to the root of the problem. Afterwards, we looked at the MRI data to see how they related to the hot coffee simulation and the photo of their lost love. Brain areas involved in our perception of physical pain have a surprising amount of overlap. We found evidence that mental distress was accompanied by physical symptoms. Many additional studies published around the same time began to show how abstract concepts like social pain can have a significant impact on our physical well-being, especially when it comes to stress. To suggest that stress kills is a 21st century cliche. It's a modern pandemic that costs the U.S. economy $500 billion a year in lost productivity. But we often forget that stress is actually a positive response in the event of a potentially dangerous circumstance. It aids our bodies in responding rapidly and efficiently. Chronic stress, on the other hand, loses its adaptive properties when the fight or flight alarm continues to sound. And, of course, our negative speech stream is a major cause of stress. Although physical danger is always a threat, the term threat incorporates a wider spectrum of experiences. How do we deal with situations that are beyond our abilities? For example, losing a job or launching a new one, getting into an argument with someone we know or care about, moving to a new city, whether it's for work or personal reasons, facing a health challenge, grieving the death of someone close, and getting a divorce. It is possible to activate a threat response similar to that which occurs when we are in immediate physical danger in any of these situations, akin to a nation assembling its armed forces in preparation for a coordinated attack against an invading army. Our bodies spring into action when the threat tripwire in our brains is tripped. Phase 1 begins immediately in the hypothalamus, a cone-shaped part of the brain. Whenever your hypothalamus detects that a threat is there, it releases adrenaline into your bloodstream via a series of chemical events. Your heart rate, blood pressure, and energy levels all increase as a result of the adrenaline's effects, as do your perceptions. The stress hormone cortisol is released to keep your jet engines running and sustain your energy levels a few seconds later. This is all taking place while chemical messengers are operating to control your digestive and reproductive systems, which are not critical to your ability to respond to an immediate threat. If you've ever noticed that your desire for eating or sex diminishes when you're in a stressful situation, it's because of these chemical messengers. It's important to remember that all of these alterations are aimed at improving your capacity to respond rapidly to stressful situations, whether you're actually witnessing the stressful situation, such as watching a thief enter your home, or merely visualizing it in your head. Yes, we can induce a long-term stress response simply by thinking about it. As a result, stress can have a terrible effect on our health. The long-term activation of our stress response systems has been linked to a wide range of ailments, from cardiovascular disease to sleep disorders to different types of cancer. In countless studies, stressful situations, such as being alone, and alone all the time, have a negative impact on our well-being. As the study shows, if you don't have adequate social support, you are at a bigger risk of dying than people who smoke more than 15 cigarettes a day or people who are overweight, or who live in a polluted area. It is possible for chronic negative thoughts to cross the line into the realm of mental disease. But this does not mean that chatter is the same as clinical depression, anxiety, or post-traumatic stress disorder. It's not a given that these circumstances are associated with negative thinking, but it is a prevalent component of them. Chatter is, in fact, a risk factor for a wide range of mental health issues. According to research, even more frightening, chatter feeds tension in a way that we don't even realize. Long-term physiological damage caused by a protracted panic response can be more detrimental than the illness itself to our ability to fight and keep our body working smoothly. It has the potential to alter the way our DNA affects our health. Genes plus environment equals who we are was a formula I learned in college when it came to the molding of human life. My instructors told me that the impacts of genes and environment did not mix. There was a box for nature and another for nurture. For a long time, this was accepted wisdom until it wasn't. New evidence reveals, much to the dismay of many scientists, that this equation is, in fact, incorrect. If you have a particular gene, it doesn't necessarily indicate that it has an effect on you. Whether those genes are activated is what makes us who we are. Imagining your DNA like a piano hidden deep within your cells is one way to approach this. When it comes to DNA, there are many ways to play the piano's keys. This keyboard has a few keys that are never going to be used. Others will be struck on a regular basis and in a variety of patterns. The way these keys are pressed separates me from you and you from everyone else. What you're seeing here is a form of gene expression. Your body and mind function in ways that are shaped by the genetic code that is within your cells. Our genetic ivories are tickled by our inner voice. It appears self-talk has an impact on which keys are played. Stanford University Medical School Professor Steve Cole has dedicated his professional life to discovering how our cells' genetic makeup and environmental influences interact. Numerous investigations conducted by him and his colleagues have revealed that the expression of our genes is altered when we are exposed to a constant state of fear and anxiety caused by constant conversation. Researchers have shown that persons who face persistent danger, regardless of the source, produce a collection of inflammation genes that are more strongly expressed in those who are lonely, poor, or diagnosed with disease. As a result of this, our cells interpret the chronic psychological threat as a viscerally hostile state that is analogous to the sense of being physically attacked. Threat system activation over a long period of time sends messages to our cells that activate inflammation genes, which are designed to defend us in the short term, but cause long-term harm. Additionally, the cells that perform everyday duties, such as protecting the body from viral viruses, are inhibited, making the body more vulnerable to disease and infection. Chatter, according to Cole, causes death at the atomic level. Zooming out, has anyone ever been killed by you? In the exam, the person who asked. Otherwise, she would have laughed at this ridiculous but seemingly important question. If she had been anywhere else, and if her future wasn't hanging in the balance, she would have laughed. Tracy said, like I told you last time. Not at all. That's what she thought. I haven't. Of course. I'm 17 years old. None of this is true. This was her second polygraph with the National Security Agency, which is one of the most secretive intelligence agencies in the United States. And the first time she was asked this question, Tracy's body told her that she was lying, and the squiggly readout showed that she was. Now, 2 months later, she was sitting in the same nondescript office in the middle of Maryland as she took another polygraph test. Suppose they don't believe me again, she wondered, and her inner voice was giving her a worried commentary as the examiner looked at her in the dark. How did she know if they didn't believe her? The future she had dreamed of would be gone. The life Tracy was born into wasn't good enough for her. She had always been good at school and learning, even though a lot of other things had not. During her childhood, she lived in a rough neighborhood in West Philadelphia. Even though her family wasn't poor, money put a limit on her future. Tracy learned about a program at a boarding school in the Northeast that allowed gifted students from all over the country to finish the last 2 years of high school on an accelerated track that set them up for success in elite colleges during her first year of high school. While the thought of leaving her family and moving to a new place was scary, the idea of meeting new people, being challenged intellectually, and leaving the life she had been living appealed to her. In the end, she worked very hard on the application and got into the school. The first time in her life, Tracy was truly tested. She went to boarding school, where she met new people and learned about new ideas that made her think for the first time in her life. As long as she was happy, she didn't mind that she didn't fit in with her mostly white classmates from rich families. To raise money for her school, Tracy was often asked to go to events with other people who were there. In the past, stories like hers made wealthy people think about giving money. A man named Bobby Inman used to be head of the U.S. National Security Agency. She met him at one of these events. During their conversation, Inman told her about a very limited undergraduate training program the NSA offered to the best and most patriotic students in the country. He told her to apply. NSA called her in for an interview, and she failed her first polygraph test. She thought that her dreams were not going to come true because she didn't pass. Her nerves calmed down the second time around. The NSA no longer thought she was guilty of murder, but they didn't know that at first. In the future, her life would change in a big way. Her first polygraph test would be a sign of what was to come, how hard it would be to control her inner voice. It seemed like at first glance that she got what she wanted with the scholarship terms she got. The NSA would pay for Tracy to go to college and give her a lot of money each month. There were, of course, rules to become a top secret analyst. She would have to spend her summers training and then work for the NSA for at least 6 years after she graduated from college. Still, it was a great chance, especially when she got into Harvard that spring. In the end, Tracy had a great future and a free Ivy League education because of her work. There were some weeks before classes began at Harvard. She got her first taste of what working for the NSA would be like. During her week-long orientation, she was given top-secret clearances, which allowed her to access highly classified information. She also learned about the specifics of the rules that came with her scholarship. This means that she could only major in a few subjects that were important to the NSA. These subjects were electrical engineering, computer science, and math. She couldn't have sex with people from other countries or have close friendships with them. She couldn't go to school abroad. She was told not to play varsity sports. Soon, Tracy's golden ticket turned into a pair of gold handcuffs. After a while, Tracy was on the lookout for people in her dorm who might try to get close to her. Before, she was the one who was talked about. Profiler. She now did this at mixers, quickly looking at people's faces and vocal intonations to see if there were any clues about where they came from out of fear that she might become friends with someone from a different country, or even be attracted to someone from a different country. She felt the same way about the math and engineering classes she was taking, which were very different from the exciting and different courses her friends were taking. On her way between classes, she thought about all the bad things about this supposedly great chance. She thought about whether or not she had made a mistake. Time has passed. During her time at school, Tracy felt more and more alone. Inner dialogue was taking over her life. She said she couldn't talk about how she spent her summers. She learned how to build circuit boards and cryptography, or how to climb rooftops to splice antennas. But her feelings of being alone were not the only thing that made her feel stressed out. Another reason was that engineering, One of the most difficult majors at Harvard was becoming the hardest academic challenge she'd ever had to deal with. If her grades dropped below a 3.0 GPA, she would be kicked out of the NSA program and have to pay back the money the government had already paid her, which was terrifying. The stream of her ever worse inner voice took over her. Before her tests, she would think about what would happen if she didn't get the grades she needed. She was so stressed out that she started chewing on the end of her pencil and twisting her hair when she took tests. Because of her nervous tics, she felt a little more at ease. This is not what you'd expect. Despite her best efforts to make it look like everything was fine, her body let her down again. This time, it did so in a different way than it did during her first polygraph exam. Cystic acne. When she started to worry about her grades, she would get pus-filled pimples under the top layer of her skin that would need cortisone injections. To get rid of them, it looked like the chatter under her skin was too loud to keep under control. How long could she take? She didn't know how long she could go on like this, as if there were only two ways for her to go: fail or drop out, making yourself into a fly on the wall. Tracy's story, like the stories of most people whose internal conversations turn into pools of negativity, is about distance. How far away we are from our problems is an important part of this story. We can think of the mind as a lens, and our inner voice as a button that lets us zoom in or out of it. Basically, chatter is what happens when we focus on something too much, causing our emotions to rise. We don't think about all the other ways we could think about the same thing that might calm us down. In other words, we lose sight. In this way, the adversity is made much worse, and the negative side of one's inner voice can play, which leads to rumination and its companions: stress, anxiety, and depression. Of course, narrowing your focus isn't a bad thing in and of itself. To the contrary, it can be very important to help us deal with difficult situations and the feelings that come up from them. During rumination, we get stuck on our problems and can't zoom out to see things from a different angle. When our internal conversation loses perspective and causes us to feel very bad, parts of our brain that process self-referential information, thinking about ourselves, and generate emotional responses become active. In other words, our stress response hardware starts to work, releasing adrenaline and cortisol, which flood us with negative emotions. This only makes our negative verbal stream speed up and zoom us in even more. As a result, we can't see things from a different angle that might show us better ways to deal with emotionally stressful situations. We can also zoom in and zoom out when we have problems, but this is much more difficult when we are stressed. Our brains, on the other hand, evolved to be able to do both. If we know how to bend our mind, we can make it do what we want. A fever can be brought down with medicine. Even our mind has a psychological defense system. We can use our thoughts to change our thoughts by making them more far away. Psychological distance, of course, doesn't solve the problem on its own. Suppose that Tracy had been able to step back from her stressful situation and settle into a less anxious state. She would still be in debt to the NSA, and her future would be in the balance. Even if Rick Ankiel had been able to keep his pitch, he would still have been on the mound pitching in the playoffs on national TV. Distance doesn't solve our problems, but it makes it more likely that we can. It clears up our verbal flow. When we hear a lot of chatter, how do we separate ourselves from it? I was 3.5 hours south of Harvard, in Manhattan, thinking about the same thing that Tracy was thinking about when she was in her freshman dorm room at Harvard. I was in the basement of Schermerhorn Hall at Columbia University, and I was thinking about the same thing that Tracy was thinking about. How can people think about their bad experiences without getting sucked into the rumination vortex? Why did I choose Columbia to train with my advisor, Walter Mischel, a scientist many people know as the Marshmallow Man? I answered that question Mischel was a pioneering scientist. Walter was a big deal in psychology because he came up with what the public now calls the marshmallow test, which is a way to study self-control. He brought kids into the lab for an experiment and gave them a simple choice. They could have one marshmallow now, or they could wait for an experimenter to return and get two. If you wait until you're older, you'll do better on your tests, be healthier, and deal better with stress. If you grab the marshmallow right away, you'll be less healthy and less able to deal with stress when you're older. That's not the only reason the marshmallow test is important. It changed how scientists think about how people can control their own behavior. The real name for it is the delay of gratification test. People at Columbia were already interested in how to help people think about painful things without getting distracted by their own thoughts. Walter and his then postdoctoral student, Zilem Iduk, were already interested in this. At the time, distraction was one of the most common ways to fight inner voice rumination. There have been a lot of studies that show that when people get stuck in negative verbal thinking, they feel better when they turn their attention away from their problems. Distraction, on the other hand, is only a band-aid for a short time. It hides the wound, but doesn't make it better. In order to get away from the difficulties of real life, you can go to the movies. When you leave the theater, your problems will still be there to deal with. Out of sight isn't really out of mind, because the negative feelings are still there, waiting to be used again. People were not talking about the idea of distancing at this time. When Aaron Beck, one of the founders of cognitive therapy and a well-known figure in mental health, made this suggestion in 1970, he called it distancing. He said that therapists should teach their patients how to look at their thoughts objectively, which he called distancing. Distancing, on the other hand, came to be seen as a way to avoid thinking about your problems. I thought that distancing itself wasn't a bad thing, but I didn't think that it was. It's possible that you could use your mind to look at your problems from a zoomed-out angle. Meditation is a type of mindfulness, but this method was different from it because the goal wasn't just for one to stand apart and watch one's thoughts pass by without engaging with them. When we talked, we wanted to be involved, but we wanted to do it from a distance. This isn't the same as not being emotionally involved. That was what my dad taught me, and what I had spent so much time doing as a child. That's when we thought about how people could step back from their experiences in order to better think about them. We found a tool that we all have: the ability to imagine things in our minds. The ability to see yourself from afar is built into the human mind. We can use this mental home theater to watch movies when we think about unpleasant memories from the past, or imagine stressful scenarios in the future, almost like videos on a cell phone. But these scenes aren't set in stone. Studies show that we don't always see our memories and dreams the same way. We can look at them from a lot of different ways. The way we see things through our own eyes, for example, can make us think we were right there in the moment. From the outside, it looks like we have been moved to another point of view. This makes us fly over the wall. We might be able to use this ability to better control our own thoughts. The three of us took people to the lab to find out. In order to do this, we asked one group to think about a bad memory through their own eyes. We asked another group to do the same thing, but from a fly-on-the-wall point of view, so that they could see themselves as if they were a bystander. Then we asked them to work through their feelings from the point of view they had been asked to take. The two groups were very different in the way they spoke. Immersers, people who saw the event from a first-person point of view, got caught up in their emotions and the words they spilled out in their stories about how they thought. They often focused on how hurt they were, infused with adrenaline. Pissed off, I'm angry, people wrote. Betrayed, which means that they were hurt. Angry, victimized, hurt, shamed, stepped on, switched, humiliated, abandoned, unappreciated, pushed, boundaries are trampled on. They tried to go inside and work through their internal conversations. But that only made them feel worse. The fly on the wall group, on the other hand, told different stories. They got stuck in the emotional weeds. The distancers went wide, which made them feel better. People wrote, I was able to see the argument better. First, I was able to understand myself better. Then, I was able to understand how my friend felt. The thing he did may have been irrational, but I can understand why he did it. Their thinking was more clear and complex, and, indeed, they seemed to be able to see events through the eyes of a third party. Afterward, they were able to tell a good story. In this experiment, we saw that taking a step back and trying to make sense of our lives could help us change the tone of our inner voice. Soon after, in more studies, we and others found that zooming out in this way also slowed down people's fight or flight cardiovascular response to stress, calmed down emotional activity in the brain, and made people less hostile and aggressive when they were provoked. This is the kind of situation that makes people chatter. Some people who had a lot of inner voice torment found that this distancing technique worked well for them. 2. For example, people with depression, and even parents who are very worried about their children's painful cancer treatments can have a hard time. We still didn't have a lot of information to go on at this point. They only talked about how distancing makes us feel right now. We also wanted to find out if it would have long-term effects, like cutting down on how long people spent ruminating about things. There were a lot of people who were also interested in this question. The University of Leuven in Belgium, led by Philippe Verdine, did some clever experiments to see if people's tendency to distance themselves in real life, outside of a lab, affected how long their emotional episodes lasted. This is what they came up with. They found that when people distanced themselves by taking an observer's point of view, their negative moods lasted less time after they had been angry or sad. Distancing could put out small fires before they got bigger and more dangerous. This dampening quality of being far away could, however, have an unintended effect. Distancing cut down on both positive and negative experiences. We all die at some point, so your well-earned happiness would go down if you reminded yourself that status and money don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. You don't want to be a fly on the wall if you want to remember good things. In these cases, immerse yourself in water and forget about everything else. The fact that we all have a tendency to be either psychologically immersed or psychologically distant when we think about emotional experiences had become clear by this point. We aren't stuck in either state. The way we think shapes the way our inner voice sounds. Fortunately, we also have the power to change how we think, along with our work and Verdine's. A lot of other studies came out around the same time that changed how we think about how distancing helps people control their emotions. Researchers at Stanford, for example, found that taking a more detached look at things led to less rumination over time. A group of researchers at Cambridge in the United Kingdom found that teaching people to see the big picture cut down on intrusive thinking, the kind that drains their executive functions and help them avoid painful memories. Other studies have shown that even if you shrink the size of an image that makes you think of bad things, it doesn't make you more angry when you see it. Another study used the idea of distancing to apply to education, and it found that ninth graders who were encouraged to think about how good grades would help them get the jobs they wanted and make a positive contribution to society as adults did better in school. Distance, then, helps us deal better not only with the big emotions we feel when things go wrong, but also with the small but important daily emotional challenges of frustration and boredom that come with the important tedium of work and school. All of this told us that taking a step back could be a good way to help people control their chatter in many different situations. But soon, we would find out that gaining mental distance also has positive effects on something else important: wisdom. This is what we learned, a paradox that was written by Solomon around 1010 BCE. In Jerusalem, a woman named Bathsheba had a dream come true. After the death of her first child, as an infant, she gave birth to a healthy young boy named Solomon. She named him after him. When we read the Bible, we know that this wasn't just any baby. When Solomon, the son of David, grew up, he went on to become king of the Jews. He was a great leader not only because of his military and economic skills, but also because of his wisdom. People would come from all over the world to get his advice. There were two women who both said that they were the mother of the same child, but he was most famous for getting them to agree. In the beginning, he said that they should cut the child in half. When one of the women said that she didn't want to do that, he was able to figure out who she was. Solomon, on the other hand, wasn't so smart when it came to his own life. Many women from different religions were married to him, and he took great care to make sure they were happy. He built temples and shrines so that they could worship their own gods. Eventually, this caused him to become estranged from both his own god and the people he ruled. This would eventually lead to the end of his kingdom in 930 BC. King Solomon's thinking is a chatter parable that shows how we don't see ourselves with the same distance and insight as we see other people. Data shows that this isn't just a story from the Bible. We are all at risk. In our group, we call this bias Solomon's paradox. King Solomon isn't the only wise person who could give it his name. Lincoln was one of the smartest people in U.S. history, but he didn't know it. In 1841, Lincoln was both professionally and romantically stuck, but he didn't know it at the time. He had not yet made himself known as a lawyer the way he wanted to. His fiancée, Mary, also made him very nervous. He had fallen in love with another woman, which made him think he didn't love her. A history book has called Lincoln's depression Lincoln's melancholy. Joshua Speed, a friend of the future president, had the same doubts about his own engagement the next year. Lincoln was now in a different role, so he was able to give Speed advice that he hadn't been able to come up with for himself. To Speed, he told him that what he thought about love was making him unhappy, not who he was going to marry. Eventually, Lincoln thought that had he been able to understand his own confusing courtship, as well as Speed's, he might have been able to sail through clear. First, let's look at how distancing can help us become wise. In a field like psychology, a vague concept like wisdom at first doesn't seem to be easy to define. Scientists, on the other hand, have found out what makes it important. Wisdom is the ability to use your mind to think constructively about a certain type of problem, those that involve uncertainty. A wise person sees the big picture in a number of ways, including realizing that one's own knowledge is limited, noticing the many different contexts of life and how they might change over time, acknowledging other people's views, and finding a way to reconcile different perspectives. We usually think of wisdom as something that comes with getting older, but research shows that you can teach people how to think wisely no matter what their age is. This is because the longer you live, the more uncertainty you will have encountered and learned from. We did a study together in 2015 called Grossman. In Grossman, we gave people a problem and asked them to predict how it would turn out in the future. Then we did the same thing again. One group of people was asked to imagine that their partner had cheated on them, while the other group thought about the same thing happening to a friend, which is a good way to separate yourself from your partner. People may understandably think that being angry when you find out your partner cheated on you is the best way to deal with the situation. Our goal was to see if distance would help us avoid conflict by cultivating a wise response. As we had hoped, people were much more intelligent when they thought the problem was happening to someone else. They thought it was more important to find a compromise with the person who had cheated, and they were also more willing to listen to that person's point of view. Another example of how people can use distance as a way to get out of Solomon's paradox comes from research on how people make decisions about their health. Few things make people talk more than having to make a big decision about your health. Worrying about physical pain or illness, even death, fills the verbal stream with anxiety. This can make us make bad decisions that, ironically, worsen our health, but we don't know what to do about it at the time. If you don't do anything and get cancer, you have a 10% chance of dying. If you try a new treatment with a 50% chance of killing you, you'll only have a 5% chance of getting cancer. The second option is better because the risk of death is 5% less. People often choose to do nothing rather than do something when it comes to their health. But 40% of the people who took the survey chose the more risky option when the same people were asked to make this decision for someone else. Only 31% made the bad choice. When you think of this percentage difference in terms of how many people get cancer each year, that means more than 1.5 million people could hurt their own chances of getting better. When we don't have mental distance, we don't have as much wisdom as we should. This can have an effect on other parts of our lives as well. Psychologist and author Daniel Kahneman says one of the most important things he learned was how to avoid having an inside view and instead have an outside view. Seeing things from inside your own head makes you think only about what is going on inside. The fact that you don't know what you don't know makes it easy to predict things that might go wrong. The outside view, on the other hand, includes a wider range of possibilities, which means it is more accurate. You're able to better predict problems and plan for them. Though Kahneman's ideas are about being able to predict the future accurately, research shows that being able to step outside of oneself, which is another way of saying mental distance, is good for making decisions more generally. It can help us get through a lot of information, like when we're comparing features and prices while car shopping, so that we can get a clearer picture. Can help people avoid loss aversion, which is the idea that people are more afraid of losing than they are of getting something back. In addition, it can make people more willing to compromise and accept different ideas. Before the 2008 U.S. presidential election, Igor and I did a study that asked people to imagine a future in which their favorite candidate lost the election from a distance. We asked them to imagine that they were living in another country. This made them less extreme in their political views and more willing to work with people who supported the other candidate. Distancing has positive effects on relationships and wisdom, which makes this skill very important in another area of our lives where we often hear our inner voices ranting. Our romantic relationships. My friend, Zilem, and I wondered how distance might affect the relationship between a person and their partner. That's why over the course of 21 days, we looked at the tendency of people to get away from their romantic partner when they had a fight. The way people thought about problems in their relationships made a difference in how they argued. When an immerser's partner calmly argued, the immerser responded in the same way. The immerser showed the same patience and compassion. But when their partners showed even the slightest sign of anger or disdain, the immersers responded in the same way, and they both felt better. As for the people who were far away, when their partners talked calmly, they, too, stayed calm. There was still a way to work things out even if their partner got angry, which made things easier for them. In a follow-up study, researchers found that teaching couples to distance themselves when they were focused on disagreements in their relationships was a good way to protect them from having a bad relationship. Over the course of a year, couples who spent 21 minutes trying to work through their problems from a distance were less unhappy with each other. A love potion isn't exactly what it sounds like, but it does seem to keep the flame of love from going out. All this research shows that taking a step back can help us change the way we talk to ourselves. That's not all. It also teaches us how to think wisely about the most chatter-inducing situations we face, which are the ones that require wisdom. All of this work shows how many ways there are to get psychological distance. It shows how many ways our minds can help us gain perspective. Even though wisdom can help us sometimes, We sometimes need more than just that, as Tracy would learn at Harvard. We need new stories, which we can make by using the power of the time machine in our own minds. In this lesson, we will learn about time travel and the power of the pen. There were times when Tracy would be in her dorm room at night and need her pencil eraser. She was a covert agent in training and a lonely scholarship student at an elite university at the same time. She was unable to help herself because of her anxiety. Finally, she talked to therapists at Harvard and the NSA. Both of the counselors didn't help her very much. She was still alone. Or was she? The project was a fun hobby for Tracy, but she thought it would help her in some way. There were so many people and events that led her to be born that she was awestruck by them. So, when she wasn't at school, she looked up stories from her past. Her family and friends took her to places like Lake Michigan, California, New Orleans, and a cemetery near her ancestors' burned-down farm. She made grave rubbings from the headstones in that cemetery and took pictures of them. 2. She learned about the hardships of being one of the first black families to live in Kalamazoo, Michigan, as her relatives talked to her about what it was like to be one of the first. In a relationship with her great-grandfather, who was white, she learned that her great-grandmother had used voodoo. She also learned about the prayers she used to fight off evil spirits. Her persistence paid off, and she got different relatives to talk about some of the most painful and oppressive times her family has had in the United States. A slave's great-grandchild confirmed that she was her great-great-grandchild. She also learned that one of her great-grandfathers had been lynched, and another had been forced into the Confederate Army. She also found out that she was a direct descendant of George Washington. Tracy found that the more she learned about her family's history, the calmer she felt when she came back to Harvard. On the one hand, as she tapped into the legacy of her forebears, she seemed to show the world that a descendant of slaves could do well at one of the most prestigious schools in the world. As a result of her problems at Harvard, she could look back on how far she had come from this historical perspective, even though her ancestors would be proud of her. She thought they would be happy with her now. She also learned about the hardships her ancestors had gone through, which made it easier to see how hard things were for her. In her mind, the stress of not getting good grades and not being able to date the person she wanted was not as bad as the pain her ancestors must have gone through as slaves. As time went on, she became a fly on the wall, not just of her own life, but also of generations of lives. Her ancestors, who survived the long journey across the Atlantic Ocean and eventually thrived in the United States, were a long line. This made her inner voice a lot calmer. There are a lot of scientific studies that support what Tracy says she has done in her own mind. They show that the ability to strategically time travel in one's mind can be used to create positive personal narratives that reroute negative inner dialogues. You don't have to use mental time travel only to weave a positive story about the present. You can also think about the past from the point of view of a bird's eye view. You can also use temporal distancing, which is when you think about going back in time. The way people think about things can help them put things in perspective. When people are going through a hard time, studies show that asking them to think about how they'll feel about it 10 years from now, rather than tomorrow, can be another way to do this. Doing so lets people know that their problems are short-term, which gives them a sense of hope. In a way, what temporal detachment encourages is one of the components of wisdom, the recognition that the world is continually changing, and that situations will change. Recognizing that aspect of life when dealing with negative situations can be really helpful. It's what helped me deal with the 2020 COVID-19 epidemic, for example, which was undoubtedly the most talked about occurrence of the previous century. CHAPTURE4. When I became you, I sat in my PJS, staring out the window of my home office, examining the night. but I could see the terrible letter and demented face of the sender perfectly in my mind. Thanks to Dexter and the Saw movies, I finally turned away from the window. I walked up to my desk, sat down, and opened my computer without thinking. Even in my terror, I knew this couldn't continue on. I was exhausted, not eating, and having difficulties concentrating at work. I walked inside again, bleary-eyed, to find a way out of this mess. The previous day's introspection had been fruitless, so I focused on the issue. So, a bodyguard, I mused, one who protects professors. As absurd as it sounds now, it wasn't absurd at the time. But just as I was about to start typing in Midwest bodyguards for frightened academics, something happened. I paused, leaned away from my computer, and asked myself, Ethan, what are you doing? It's insane. Strangely, saying my own name in my brain, addressing myself as if to someone else, allowed me to stand back. I was able to look at my situation more objectively. The idea that a little industry had formed for defending professors with Navy SEAL, credentialed bodyguards, was logical enough to Google, but suddenly appeared insane. Others soon followed once I realized it. What good is pacing the house with a baseball bat? I mused. You have a modern alarm system. Nothing else has happened since you got the letter. Probably a hoax. So, what worries you? Live your life as you used to. Consider family, students, and research. Many people receive empty threats. You've survived worse. You can handle it. Ethan, I thought. Now bed. I strolled from my workplace to my bedroom as these ideas spread like a bomb on a wound. My heartbeat slowed, and my feelings shifted. Heavier. I closed my eyes without clenching my teeth, without booby-trapping my bedroom door, without grasping my little league baseball bat, and slept peacefully till daylight. Naming myself rescued me, not my hostile stalker, but me. I kept thinking about what had transpired in the days and weeks that followed. On one side, I was a self-control expert psychologist who had temporarily lost my self-control and reason. However, I had recovered control of my emotions and mental dialogue by talking to myself as if I were another person. In most cases, using one's own name is connected with eccentricity, narcissism, or even mental illness. In that moment of stress, I had subdued my inner voice ... with my inner voice, and I did so unintentionally. The frequency illusion is a well-known psychological discovery. It depicts the usual phenomenon of learning a new term and suddenly seeing it everywhere. The word, or whatever new insight you've had, has always been available in your environment. Your brain was just not attuned to it, so it's a mental illusion. I had a similar experience after recognizing I had spoken to myself at a stressful period. That's when my mind started picking up on people talking to themselves in third person using their names and other non-first person pronouns. Over the months and years that followed, I observed it more and more in various circumstances. The threatening letter came in the spring of 2011, but the first example that drew my eye was a summer 2010 memory of basketball phenom LeBron James. As a lifelong Knicks fan, I had hoped he'd come back to save my struggling team. Instead, he went on ESPN to announce that he was leaving the Cleveland Cavaliers, the organization that had nurtured his career from the start, to join the Miami Heat. I didn't want to make an emotional decision, LeBron told ESPN's Michael Wilbon, and I wanted to do what was best for LeBron James, and what LeBron James will do to make him happy. He said seconds after stating his intention to avoid making an emotional decision. Years later, I came across a video of Malala Yousafzai on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. In the summer of 2012, Malala, then 14, learned that the Taliban had pledged to shoot her for her vocal support for girls' education rights. After learning of the threat against her, Malala accidentally acknowledged that using her own name to coach herself had been essential. What would you do, Malala? She questioned herself as she retold her experience in the first person. Then I'd think, Malala, just take a shoe and hit him. But then I added, if you hit a talib with your shoe, then you and the talib are one. It was not only in modern culture. Like Jennifer Lawrence interrupting an emotional interview with a New York Times reporter to tell herself, okay, get a hold of yourself, Jennifer, but also in historical incidents that had been overlooked. A literary style Julius Caesar used to recount his work on the Gallic Wars, in which he had participated, was known as a lesson. He wrote about himself instead of using the term. Then there was the Pulitzer Prize winning autobiography of American historian Henry Adams, written in 1918. In keeping with this aesthetic, he didn't call the book My Education. He titled it Henry Adams' Education. My observations regarding how people talk to themselves have already been shared with my students and colleagues. So we started talking in the lab and looking at the relationship between language and distance. We had a strong hunch that saying one's own name, quietly in one's own thinking, not aloud, helped people manage their inner voice. Of course, all I had was anecdotal evidence. It wasn't scientific proof, but it seemed to point to a pattern in human behavior. Using one's name to mentally talk to oneself in a time of distress took neither time nor attention. As my colleagues and I had discovered, speaking to oneself as if you were someone else be a distancing act. Speak your name out loud. Are you kidding me? The person in our experiment asked. It was true. The experimenter told him that. Stay with me. She took him down the hall. He, like the other people who came into our lab, only knew that he was going to do an experiment on language and emotion. Volunteers did not know about the method we were going to use until they arrived at the lab. It is one of the most powerful ways scientists can make people feel stressed in the lab. We asked them to speak in front of an audience without giving them enough time to prepare. When we did this, we hoped to learn more about how people might be able to control their own inner voices when they were in situations like the ones we had made up. In our theory, we didn't just use my own experience or the words of Malala, LeBron James, and other people. We looked at more than that. Previous research has shown that people who use a lot of first-person singular pronouns, which is called a talk, are more likely to be in a bad mood. For example, a large study that took place in 6 labs across 2 countries with more than 5,000 people found a strong link between I talk and negative emotions. Another one found that by figuring out how much I talk people use in their Facebook posts, you can figure out how likely it is that they will get depressed in the future. I, me, and my are all examples of first-person singular pronouns that can be used when talking to oneself. This can be a way to learn a new language. What would happen if you not only made people less likely to think about themselves in the first person, but also made them talk about themselves as if they were talking to someone else? Our idea was that when you use your own name and also use the second and third person, it makes you feel like you're talking to someone else when you're talking to yourself. This makes you feel like you're talking to someone else when you're talking to yourself. Why did I get angry at my co-worker today? Person, why did Ethan get mad at his co-worker today? Afterward, we randomly split the participants into 2 groups. One that used the first-person pronoun, I to talk about their fears about their upcoming speech, and the other that used non-first-person pronouns and their own name to talk about the same thing. After they were done, we took them down the hall to give their presentations in front of a panel of judges who had been taught to keep their faces expressionless and a big video camera that was right in front of them. It was a show. Participants who used distanced self-talk said that they felt less shame and embarrassment after giving their speech than participants who used immersed self-talk. They also didn't think about their performance as much afterward. Instead of talking about how nervous they were or how difficult the task was, they said that their inner voices talked about how there was nothing important at stake. As we coded the videos and looked deeper into the data from the experiment, We found that it wasn't just the participants' emotions that were different. They also said that people in the group that did not talk to themselves as much did better on the task. Distanced self-talk is a new way to separate yourself from someone, as our experiments and others have shown. Shifting from the first person I to the second person you or third person he or she allows us to gain emotional distance. Distanced self-talk, then, is a psychological trick that is built into the language of humans, and we now know that it has a lot of different benefits. In other studies, distanced self-talk helps people make better first impressions, perform better on stressful problem-solving tasks, and make better decisions, just like fly-on-the-wall self-talk does. It also helps people think logically. During the height of the Ebola crisis in 2014, some people were afraid that the virus could spread to the United States. So we did a study on the internet with people from all over the United States. We found that people who were worried about Ebola and were asked to use their own names to think about how the Ebola scare would play out in the future found more fact-based reasons not to worry, which led to less anxiety and risk perception. They no longer thought it was very likely that they would get the disease, which was both more accurate and put a stop to their panicked inner voices. Research also shows that distant self-talk can help people deal with one of the most chatter-inducing situations I've looked into, having to choose between our love for people we care about and our moral principles. For example, a person we know does something bad, and we have to decide whether to protect or punish them. Studies show that when people have this internal conflict, they are much more likely to protect people they know than to report them. This is a phenomenon that we see all the time in real life, like the university administrators and gymnastics officials who didn't stop the now convicted child molesting doctor, Larry Nassar, assuming that the reason we want to protect certain people is because we are close to them. Then distanced self-talk should help us step back from ourselves and the relationships we have with other people. Sure enough, we did a lot of tests, and this is what we found. Some of my students and I did a study where we asked people to imagine that they were watching a friend or family member do something bad, like secretly using another person's credit card. Then, they were asked by a police officer if they saw anything. Participants who used their own name to think about what they should do were more likely to report serious crimes to the police officer. For example, what facts are Maria taking into account when she makes this decision? These findings show that distanced self-talk can be very useful, but they didn't look at another thing that makes it so good: how fast it is. When I used my own name to calm myself down, one of the things I found most interesting is how easy it was. In most cases, it takes a lot of time to control our emotions. Just think about how much work it takes to imagine how you'll feel about something in the future. Write a journal entry to think about your thoughts and feelings, or close your eyes and picture a past experience from a fly-on-the-wall point of view. These are all self-distancing tools that have been proven to work. Yet, because they take a lot of work, they're not always easy to use in the heat of the moment. Now, think about what I've done. All I had to do was say my name, and it changed the direction my inner voice took. It was like switching the direction a train goes when it comes to a Y junction. Distanced self-talk seemed to be quick and powerful, unlike many other ways to control your emotions. How could that be? I don't know. In linguistics, shifters are words that have different meanings depending on who is talking. For example, I and you can have different meanings depending on who is talking. Suppose Danny asks, "Can you pass me the ketchup?" And Maya responds, "Yes, here you go." The person that you refers to shifts. It first talks about Maya, then Danny. Most kids learn that language works this way by the time they are 2 years old. They can switch perspectives in milliseconds, and can do it very quickly, too. The idea of shifters shows how powerful certain words can be at changing our perspectives. Our thought was that distanced self-talk might work in the same way. making a shift in perspective happen almost automatically and with very little effort. An experiment was set up by Jason Moser, a psychologist at Michigan State University. We wanted to see how quickly distanced self-talk worked. So we used this lens on language and psychological distance. It was only when we looked at their bodies that people's inner voices were heard, not when we looked at them. What am I feeling? Or what is Jason feeling? Were two ways we asked people to think about how they felt when they saw a disturbing picture in our experiment. As they did this, we used an electroencephalogram machine to keep track of the electrical activity in their brains. This is a good way to figure out how quickly different psychological operations work in the brain. Results show that when people used distanced language to think about their feelings after seeing disturbing pictures, their brains were less active. But the most important thing they found was how long it took the participants to feel the relief of distance. In 1 second, we saw people's emotions change after they saw a bad picture. 1 second. That's all. Equally exciting to us. We didn't find any evidence that this kind of self-talk took a toll on people's ability to think on their own. This was very important, because more effortful methods of distancing can lead to a catch-22. Chatter that's buzzing takes away from our brain power, so we can't focus on anything, get away, or control our inner voice. Yet, distanced self-talk avoids this problem because it doesn't require a lot of work. It is very good at getting things done. If changing the words we use to think about ourselves is a way to get away from stress at a high speed, it makes sense that it would also change how our inner voice sounds. We all have the ability to see things that make us stressed as challenges rather than threats. And distanced self-talk can help us use this ability. To see how this works, let's visit an old friend. Come on, Fred. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was a classic 30-minute television program that aired from 1968 and 2001. Although Rogers appears calm and collected, his inner voice may bother him, as it does us. A letter he wrote himself in 1979, just after returning from a 3-year hiatus from his program, shows his inner critic in full view. Am I delusional to think I can write a script once more? Is that all I'm doing? What if? I'll never know till I try. Why not? I believe in myself. That, and avoiding the agony of creation, is all it is. The problem continues after years. I wonder if every creative artist goes through the horrible tortures of creating. That's fine. The time has come. Arrive. Fred, go. Roger's breathtakingly vulnerable letter gives us a rare glimpse into his fluctuating inner voice. A raw conversation relic of sorts. A self-doubt, self-criticism, and even despair fill the first third of the letter. The progression of Roger's note to himself suggests a different way of viewing the event. Aware that he must face his fears regardless of his insecurities, he begins to relax. I must. Then he acts. He uses detached language, his own name, to convince himself that he can compose his own program. He went back to work for another 22 years, revealing the fork in the path we all face when confronted by a crisis. For example, when placed in difficult situations, people ask themselves, typically subconsciously, 2 questions. What is expected of me? And do I have the personal resources to meet the demands of my circumstances? Assuming we can't handle the circumstance, we assess the stress as a danger for those of us who are capable of responding appropriately. The circumstance is viewed as a challenge to our inner voice. The way we talk about our situation matters. Unsurprisingly, framing an issue more constructively leads to better outcomes, and it permitted Mr. Rogers to accept the challenge of creation while continuing to create. Several research substantiate Mr. Rogers' message. We do better when we view stressors as challenges rather than threats. Whether it's completing arithmetic tests, functioning under pressure, or managing the damaging consequences of stereotyping. With the challenge attitude, detached self-talk can be the critical push. as Mr. Rogers' use of his own name to urge himself implies. Instead of catastrophizing, distant self-talk encourages people to think about stressful events as challenges. With immersed or distanced self-talk, participants in one of my studies were asked to write about their deepest sentiments about an anticipated stressful event. 70% of participants in the detached self-talk group had the greatest levels of challenge-oriented thinking. But the group with the most threat-oriented thinking was the absorbed self-talk group, with 67% of the participants. Regarding the fear of losing a job if one makes a mistake during an interview, one participant wrote, "And I always fail. I am usually nervous and unsure of what to say. Nervousness leads to lousy interviews, which leads to further nervousness, and so on. Even if I landed a job, I fear interviews." Inner voices of the distanced language group varied. "Aaron, you need to slow down. Everyone is worried about a date. Why did you say that? Reverse it. Come on, guy. You can do it." The influence of language on our predisposition to perceive challenges or dangers is not limited to the content of people's thinking. It is also seen in people's bodies. Biological indicators of psychological challenge and threat. People's hearts beat quicker when threatened. A challenge is similar. The body's tangle of arteries and veins responds differently in each stage. Anxiety causes the vasculature to contract, reducing blood flow and causing blood vessel ruptures and heart attacks. As a result, persons who are in challenge mode have relaxed vasculature, allowing blood to flow freely throughout the body. Lindsay Streamer, Mark Siri, and his colleagues at the University at Buffalo wanted to see if detached self-talk may cause changes in cardiovascular systems. Could you persuade your mind and body to see a scenario as challenging rather than scary through detached self-talk? A challenge mode cardiovascular response was observed in participants who were instructed to use their name to reflect on stress. Before giving a public statement, they exhibited a classic biological danger response. You might question if detached self-talk helps adults. Can it help kids? Finding strategies to help your children study is one of the most critical jobs a parent can teach their children how to endure. The Batman effect was found by Stephanie Carlson and Rachel White, psychologists. The researchers had a group of kids pretend to be superheroes while doing a tiresome homework job. The youngsters were to assume the character's role and then assess their performance using the character's name as a benchmark. The study had one girl pretending to be Dora the Explorer and asked, "Is Dora working hard?" In their research, Carlson and White found that children who did this outlasted those who did not. A third set of kids outperformed the I group by using their own names. Distant self-talk may help children cope with stress, such as the loss of a parent. The happy memories can be held onto, and the unpleasant ones can be let go. Immersed language users reported greater rates of PTSD symptoms and maladaptive coping strategies. I vividly remember how he looked at the end. One child remarked, "I hope he wasn't hurt. I regret his death." These findings demonstrate how subtle changes in how we refer to ourselves during introspection might impact our ability to manage chatter across domains. Consider whether other sorts of detached self-talk can help people manage emotions as well. The additional shifts are there, but they are used in such a subtle, seamless manner that my colleagues and I would almost miss them entirely. Universal you. It was only when the police officer I spoke with told me that such threats were in fact commonplace for persons in public-facing occupations, and that they usually always blow over without incident, that I felt a glimmer of peace, if only temporarily. The letter didn't feel like an exciting challenge, and the information didn't eliminate my anxieties, but it was a ray of optimism. It made me less lonely. Normalizing experiences provides a powerful psychological comfort, knowing that what you're going through isn't unique to you, but rather something everyone goes through, that it's just part of life. When we face sorrow, marital problems, career failures, parental issues, or other challenges, we frequently feel isolated and alone. But when we talk to others and find that others have had similar issues, we realize that, as difficult as it is not unique. If others have survived, our inner voice says, so can I. What seemed spectacular was in fact mundane. This helps. What if, instead of hearing others talk about overcoming difficulty or benefiting from their skill, we could locate a similar sort of detached self-talk? Does the sheer structure of language help us think about our own personal experiences in more universal terms? In May 2015, David Goldberg, a Silicon Valley entrepreneur and Sheryl Sandberg's husband, died unexpectedly on a treadmill while on vacation in Mexico. Sandberg was crushed. Her existence with Goldberg had vanished, as though torn from her hands. She sought strategies to withstand the anguish that threatened to engulf her. As we all know, expressive writing is a powerful technique of acquiring useful emotional space. Yet, with the words she chose in one entry, which she chose to post on Facebook, she did something odd. In Sandberg's words, "My emphasis, I believe tragedy presents an option. This is where you can give into the emptiness that fills your heart and lungs, limiting your ability to think or even breathe. Or you might seek meaning." Her usage of the second person you and your may appear unusual at first. I is not used in her writing on one of the most excruciating personal experiences imaginable. Instead, she uses the term you, but not in the manner we've explored before, as if addressing herself directly. Instead, she uses it to express the universality of her struggle. Anyone can give into the nothingness, the emptiness that fills everyone's heart, lungs, and restricts their ability to think or even breathe. Or everyone can seek meaning. Nobody else uses the word you in this way. Similar usages can be found in ordinary conversation, talk shows, and radio, and song lyrics. It's difficult to read interviews with athletes talking about bad games, or politicians talking about barriers without noticing their usage of you to describe their experience more widely. Of course, the question is why. When we talk about our own intensely emotional experiences, we often use a word that refers to someone else. You, generic you or universal you, is what Susan Gelman and Ariana Orville, and I term this usage. We discovered that another linguistic trick enhances psychological detachment. Psychologists Amanda Vickery and our Chris Fraley saw the Northern Illinois tragedy as both heartbreaking and important. They were already working on a project to better understand how people deal with grief and share emotions in real time. Some of the most painful things people go through can help us learn how to help people deal with them. To be able to do so requires both delicacy and compassion, as well as a strong belief in the scientific method and its ability to help the whole world. They set out to do this after the shooting in DeKalb. In the beginning, they asked a lot of students from Northern Illinois to take part in a study to see how they were coping. When a gunman killed 32 people at Virginia Tech 10 months ago, he left behind a community that was in mourning. As soon as that attack happened, Vickery and Fraley also tried to get in touch with a group of people from Virginia Tech. Now they had 2 samples to look at together to get a picture of how the survivors dealt with the flood of emotions that came after the attack. About 3/4 of students in the 2 samples showed signs of depression or post-traumatic stress 2 weeks after the shootings. I thought this was going to happen. All but a few of them were dealing with the worst thing that had ever happened to them in their lives. Tragedies like what the students had been through in both Illinois and Virginia can change a person's worldview, but they don't happen very often. To lessen the pain, some people try not to think about their bad memories. The students, on the other hand, tried to make sense of their feelings by talking to other people, which is what they did. Most of them joined a Facebook group to talk about and read about what had happened. 78% talked about it online. and 74% texted about it on their phones. They found this way of letting go of their chatter comforting. It allowed them to share their thoughts and feelings with other people who had been through the same thing, which can be a good way to make things more normal. If you feel lonely, you can log on to Facebook or send someone an IM, and you'll feel like you're a little closer to other people. None of this was very surprising. As we already know, people are naturally drawn to sharing their thoughts with others when they're having trouble with chatter, and social media and other forms of virtual connectivity make it easy to do so. During the study, Vickery and Fraley were surprised by what they found when it was over 2 months after the shootings. While the students at Virginia Tech and Northern Illinois University thought that expressing their emotions to other people made them feel better, the level to which they shared their emotions didn't actually make them feel better. All of the feelings, writing, connecting, and remembering that I did wasn't good, from Aristotle to Freud. There was a long line of people who were important. It was the same year that the Northern Illinois massacre happened, and a related study was published that looked at how people in the United States coped with the September 11th attacks. Researchers looked into whether more than 2,000 people across the country chose to show how they felt about 9/11 in the 10 days after the Twin Towers fell. Over the next 2 years, they kept an eye on the physical and mental health of the people who took part in the study. They were looking at a lot of different types of human behavior, but their question was simple. Do we feel better when we share our feelings? They found that what Vickery and Fraley found was very similar to what they found. People who talked about how they felt about 9/11 right after it happened didn't feel any better. As a group, they did worse than the people who didn't talk about how they felt. They talked more and tried to avoid problems more. More than that, people who chose to share their feelings had the most general distress and poorer physical health if they did. Shared emotions didn't help this time either. This hurt when tragedy happens. You might think that sharing your feelings with other people isn't a good idea. But, of course, both the shootings at college and the 9/11 attacks were very rare. Back to Bernard Rhyme, the Belgian psychologist whose work we are going to talk about now. Remember the basic pattern in human behavior that Rhyme found. The feelings we have when we're angry or sad are like jet fuel that makes us want to talk to other people about the thoughts and feelings that are running through our minds. But in addition to this, he found something even more important and surprising, which shows that these studies on the emotional effects of major disasters aren't just one-offs. In many studies, Ryan found that talking about our bad experiences with other people doesn't help us get over them in any way. Sharing our feelings with others makes us feel closer to and more supported by the people we open up to. But that's not the only reason. But the way most of us talk and listen to each other doesn't help cut down on our chatter. Quite often, they make it worse. Rhyme's findings, as well as many others, are very different from what most people think. People often say that talking makes you feel better. Many self-help books say this, as do many people we know. We hear that it is good to let our emotions out, and that it is important to help others. A lot of things make it look like it's easy. The idea that talking about negative emotions with other people is good for us isn't new. It has been a part of Western culture for more than 2,000 years now, and it hasn't changed. Aristotle was one of the first people to say that people need to get rid of their emotions after watching a sad thing, which he called catharsis. But until 2 millennia later, this practice didn't really catch on with more people. Sigmund Freud and his mentor Joseph Breuer took Aristotle's idea and said that the way to a sound mind was to bring the dark pain in their inner lives into the light. This is what they did. You can think of this as the hydraulic model of emotion. People who have strong feelings need to let them out like steam coming out of a hot kettle. Our culture tells us from a young age that we should talk to other people about our feelings. The underlying desire to talk about our feelings is stronger at a much earlier point in our development. Our inner voice is actually implanted in our minds. When we are still babies, we spit up and drool. As babies, we can't take care of ourselves or control our emotions. So we show our caregivers how we're feeling by wailing like little banshees. Or at least, that's what my daughters did. All of our wants and fears are met, and our physiological arousal levels go back to normal after we have them all met. People who care for babies often talk to them even before they can understand words. Doing this helps build a connection between them and the caretaker. When we're young, our brains start to learn language and pick up on what our caregivers say about why things happen and how to fix them, as well as how to deal with our emotions. These tools help us manage how we feel, but they also help us talk about our experiences with other people in a clear way. This is one reason why communication and chatter go hand in hand. The good news is that there is a reason why the support we get from others often backfires, and there is a way to avoid this. We can use other people to help us quiet down our chatter, and we can help others do the same. In order to benefit from a tool, we must know how to correctly use it. And in this case, we need to know two things that all people need. One of the traps that people fall into is the co-rumination trap. It's important for us to vent our emotions and be consoled and validated when we're feeling hurt or vulnerable. We also want to know that we're not alone. This gives us a sense of security and connection right away, and it feeds our basic need to feel like we belong. The first thing we look for in other people when our inner voice is filled with negative thoughts is a way to meet our emotional needs. Often, people think of fight or flight as the main way people defend themselves when they see a threat. You either run away or get ready for the fight when you're stressed out. While this is a common human reaction, researchers have found that many people also use attend and befriend stress response when they're in danger. They look for help and care from other people. This is how it works. It makes sense from an evolutionary point of view because two people are more likely to fight off a predator than just one. When you need help, it can be beneficial to band together. Research backs up this idea, saying that when we connect with others, when we're stressed, we feel more secure and connected. Biochemical reactions that make us feel less stressed, like the production of opioids and oxytocin, the cuddle hormone, happen when we feel like we belong. We also talk a lot to do this. Of course, people who help us with our chatter can show that they care about us by listening and acting like they care. In the short term, this can make you feel better, giving you some relief. In other words, this is just one part of the equation. Our cognitive needs must be met as well. So that is why, when we're dealing with chatter, we face a problem that needs to be solved. Often, we need help working through a problem, seeing the bigger picture, and deciding on the best way to move forward. All of this can't be solved by someone who cares about you and listens to you. We often need other people to help us distance, normalize, and change how we think about the things we're going through. By doing this, we let our emotions cool down, which helps us get out of a rut and help us move our words in a new direction. Yet, this is why talking about emotions so often backfires. Even though it has a lot of power to help people, a lot of chatter in our heads makes us more likely than other people to focus on our emotional needs instead of the things we need to think about. In other words, when we're angry, we tend to focus more on getting sympathy than on coming up with practical solutions. This problem is made worse by the fact that the people we ask for help do the same thing. They put our emotional needs ahead of our cognitive ones. There are people who see our pain and try to show us that we're important. This is natural, a way to show you care, and sometimes even useful in the short run. If we do say that we want more cognitive help, research shows that people don't always pay attention. One set of experiments found that even when support providers are asked to give advice to help people with their cognitive needs, they still think it's more important to help people with their emotional needs. And it turns out that when we try to meet our emotional needs, our efforts end up making our friends feel worse. Talking can go wrong in this way. To show that they care about us, people are usually eager to find out exactly what happened to us. Who, what, when, where, and why. They want us to tell them how we felt and how things went. And even though they may nod and show empathy when we tell them what happened, this often causes us to relive the very feelings and experiences that led us to seek help in the first place, which is called co-rumination. Co-rumination is the point where support turns into subtle encouragement. People who care about us make us talk more about our bad experience, which makes us more angry, which makes them ask even more questions. People get caught in a loop, even though they have good intentions behind them. Co-rumination is like adding new logs to a fire that already has a lot of fuel. The retelling of the story brings back the unpleasantness and keeps us thinking about it. We feel more connected and supported by people who talk to us this way, but it doesn't help us come up with a plan or think of new ways to look at a problem. Instead, it makes us feel bad and raises our body's fight or flight response. It's not true that our emotional and inner voice mechanics work like a hydraulic system. As Freud, Aristotle, and conventional wisdom say. Instead, they work more like a pump, which can lead to harmful co-ruminative dynamics in healthy relationships. There is still a lot of pressure inside, so letting out steam doesn't help. The reason for this is that when it comes to our inner voice, the game of dominoes is a better analogy than the game itself. When we focus on a negative part of our experience, that tends to make us think about something else that is negative, which makes us think about something else that is negative, and so on. Continue to hit one another in a game where there could be an infinite number of tiles. As a result, our memories of emotional experiences follow the rules of associationism, which means that we think of things that are linked together in our minds. To show this, picture a cat for a moment. A lot of people think of cats they know or have seen when they read the word cat. As well, you thought about purring sounds and soft fur. If you're allergic, you might also have thought about sneezing. Now, apply this associative neural dominoing to the way we talk about our emotions as well. A lot of negative thoughts and feelings come up when people ask us to tell them about our problems in great detail. This makes us feel even worse. It's because our memories are linked to each other and we tend to put our emotional needs above our cognitive ones when we're stressed. This is why talking doesn't always help us get out of our bad moods. They didn't get any tangible long-term benefit from sharing their thoughts and feelings about the shootings with other people. This is one possible reason for this. People who talked about their feelings in a national survey after 9/11 divided by the 11th of May have had more physical and mental problems because they talked about how they felt about the event. In other words, what's the best way to stop co-rumination from making us feel worse? It's between Kirk and Spock. The Star Trek characters of Captain Kirk and Officer Spock are a common way to talk about the tension between emotions and cognition, or the difference between what we feel and what we think. Kirk has a lot of heart and strong feelings. He's hot. Spock, on the other hand, is all head. He's a clever problem solver who doesn't have to deal with the distractions of emotions. He's cold. Putting together the two crew members from the Starship Enterprise is the best way to keep from thinking about the past. So do that. When we help someone, we need to give them the comfort of Kirk and the wisdom of Spock. Verbal exchanges that work best are those that address both the social and cognitive needs of the person who needs help. The interlocutor should acknowledge the person's feelings and thoughts, but then help her see the situation in a different way. It's a good thing that you can make people who are upset feel validated and connected, but then you can give them big picture advice that only you can give because you aren't in their heads all the time. In fact, The latter task is very important for helping people learn how to control their inner voice in a way that leads them to have less chatter in the long run. There are times when we can't help people see things from a new perspective because of the pace of life. People don't like to think about their feelings when they're at the top of an emotional roller coaster. They prefer to think about their feelings later on when they've calmed down. A certain skill comes into play when you talk to other people. To help someone who is upset, you must walk a tightrope so you can help them think about more practical things like their emotions and their brains instead. In fact, the New York Police Department hostage negotiations team, which formed in the early 1970s after a lot of bad things happened in New York City and around the world, has been doing this for years. For example, there was the riot in the 1971 Attica prison. There was the 1972 Munich Olympics massacre. And there was the 1972 Brooklyn bank robbery in the movie Dog Day Afternoon. A police officer and clinical psychologist named Harvey Schlossberg was given the job of writing the new unit's playbook. The unit's motto was "Talk to me." Also, he said that he wanted people to be kind to each other instead of using force. It's possible that when the hostage takers realized that they weren't in immediate danger, their autonomic threat response likely went down. This calmed down their inner voice, which made it easier for the negotiator to move the conversation toward ending the standoff. As soon as the NYPD hostage negotiations team was up and running, the city saw a big drop in hostage situations that turned out bad. Breakthrough. This led law enforcement agencies around the world, and even the FBI, to follow suit. The Bureau came up with its own method called the Behavioral Change Stairway Model, which is a series of steps to help negotiators. In this order: active listening, empathy, rapport, influence, change in behavior. Basically, it's a roadmap for meeting people's social emotional needs that helps them find a solution that makes use of their brain power. Even though law enforcement negotiators are naturally trying to defuse dangerous situations and arrest criminals, their work is a lot like coaching someone you care about through a problem. You can help both people by giving them the right kind of support with words. When you help people in your life deal with their inner voices, all of these strategies can help you make better decisions about who to go to for emotional support. As well, is it after they've made you feel validated and understood that they help you come up with practical ideas? Or do they go into too much detail and bring back the bad memories by saying things like, "He's such a jerk. I'm shocked that he did that"? Reflecting after the fact can help you figure out if someone helped you immerse or keep you from it. Most likely, it will be a mix of the two. This can be the start of a conversation about how the person can better help you next time. When you think about other things with your chatter advisors, you can also figure out which people are the best for different kinds of problems. Friends, coworkers, and loved ones can help with a wide range of emotional problems. When the problems are more specific, it might be better to talk to a specific person. Your brother might be the right person to help you through family problems, or he might be the wrong person. Your spouse might be the best person to talk to about your work problems, or it might be someone from another department at work. Indeed, research shows that people who have a wide range of sources of support, such as different relationships for different needs, benefit the most. The most important thing to do after an event that makes people talk is to think about who helped you and who didn't. As we move into the digital age, we have access to a whole new set of resources. This is how you build your chatter board of advisors. When Dan Savage and Terry Miller heard that another gay teenager had taken his own life after being bullied for a long time, they were looking for a way to respond to the news. This is a powerful example. For the second time in a week, a 15-year-old named Billy Lucas hanged himself in his grandmother's barn in Indiana. Savage had written a blog post about his death, and a reader said that he wished he could have told the boy that things would get better, to show how even though their teenage years were hard, they lived happy lives as adults filled with love and a sense of belonging. They put the video on YouTube, and it went viral in a week. Similar videos were made by many, and gay teenagers in different parts of the country told him how the videos made them feel better. When that first video was made 10 years ago, it was more than just a viral thing. It was a real feeling. It Gets Better is a new nonprofit organization and a global grassroots movement that is making a difference. There have been more than 75,000 people who have shared their inspirational stories. Almost 10 times as many people have said they will help, and countless young gay people have found comfort and strength. People who are emotionally vulnerable have been rescued by It Gets Better because it acts as a tool that helps them separate from their emotions and move forward in their minds. Everyone gets picked on, but we all get through it and move forward in our minds. Most interesting of all is that people who watch the video don't have to know the people who are giving the advice in order to benefit from it. This is a principle that applies to all kinds of social support videos that are available online. We can find people who can help us with our chatter in the form of pre-recorded people. Who do we go to for help? And how do they talk to us when we're dealing with chatter raises a question about therapy and its effectiveness, because it's clear that it involves a lot of talking. It is sometimes called the talking cure. Is it true that it works? The first thing to keep in mind is that there are a lot of different types of talk therapy, and they can be very different in how they work. Many types of therapy that have been proven to work, like cognitive behavioral therapy, use the same kinds of techniques we've been talking about in this chapter. They help clients deal with their emotions, but they also help them think through their problems. Some interventions, on the other hand, still emphasize in-depth emotional venting as a way to cut down on chatter. Case in point, psychological debriefing is an approach that emphasizes the value of unburdening one's emotions in the immediate aftermath of a bad experience, even though there is overwhelming evidence that it doesn't work. Having a conversation with a friend or loved one may not be enough to deal with your chatter. So if that's the case, have a conversation with your potential mental health providers to learn about their approach and see if it's proven. Invisible help. Everything we've talked about so far has been about situations where people are looking for help. Many people have chatter, but they don't always ask for help. Try to solve the problem on their own, or be afraid that asking for help will make people think less of them and how they see themselves. But sometimes we still want to help in some way. It turns out that seeing people we care about in trouble is a powerful neurobiological thing to do. It makes us feel sorry for them, which makes us want to help them. Under these circumstances, though, you should be careful. It doesn't matter how good you are at combining Kirk and Spock's strengths. Giving out advice without asking for it can be dangerous, even if you're very good at combining their strengths. As well, if we give advice at the wrong time, this can also backfire. Think about the experience of a parent telling a child how to do a math problem that she is having trouble with. The parent spends a lot of time thinking about the problem. They know that a patient, clear explanation is what their child needs to do well on the assignment and feel better about herself. It's a mental solution that should make you feel better, right? Except that doesn't happen, as the parent explains. The child turns sour and gets agitated when they hear what they are going to do. Somehow, when there is a fight, the clean math logic gets muddled by emotions. Kid, I've done it before. He says that you were having a hard time, so that's why I was trying to help you. The parent says, no, I don't need your help. The child storms off to her own room. How does the parent feel? Then, what did happen if this was an experience that happened to you? It might or might not have been a story about your own life. Giving advice without taking into account the person's needs can hurt their sense of self-efficacy, which is the belief that we can deal with problems. This means that when we know that others are helping us, but we haven't asked for their help, we think it means we must be helpless or not very good at something. This is a feeling that our inner voice might latch onto. A lot of psychological research has shown that when our sense of self-efficacy isn't strong, it can hurt our health, decision-making, and relationships, as well as our sense of self. In the late 1990s, Columbia psychologist Niall Balger and his team used the New York bar exam to see when people's efforts to help another person are most effective. Heading through the bar, which all lawyers and their loved ones know, is a grueling, twitchy test. Balger looked for couples where one person was studying for the bar for a little over a month. He asked the examinees to answer a set of questions about how anxious and depressed they felt and how much support they got from their partner. He also asked the partners of the people who were being tested to say how much help they gave them. Balger was mostly interested in whether the benefits that people get from getting social support depend on whether they know that their partner is trying to help them out or not. The study found that helping someone without them knowing, which is called invisible support, was the best way to help them without making them feel bad about not having enough money or resources to deal with their problems on their own. As a result of getting indirect help, the participants felt less depressed. In practice, this could be any kind of help that isn't asked for, like taking care of the housework or making more quiet space for the person to work. It can also be about skillfully giving people advice that will help them see things from a new angle without them realizing that it is meant for them. For example, you could ask someone else for advice that has implications for your friend or loved one while the person who needs it is around. You could also talk about how other people have dealt with similar situations to normalize the experience. Doing these things sends important information and support, but they don't draw attention to the vulnerable person's flaws. Since Balger started this field with his first experiment, other research has come together to show that invisible support works. It turns out that invisible support can make people happier in their relationships the day after they get it. Another study found that people were more likely to meet their self-improvement goals if their partner's support for them was hidden from them. When people are being judged, or are preparing to be, more research has shown that invisible support can be very helpful. It can happen, for example, when they're studying for exams, getting ready for interviews, or rehearsing the points of a presentation. During these times, people feel the most at risk, because when people want to quickly and efficiently manage their chatter, it doesn't matter how subtle or clever you are when you help them. In this case, direct advice that comes from both Kirk and Spock is the best thing to do. It's also likely to work, as well as the other ways we've talked about. There's one more way we can help people we're close to who are having a hard time keeping up with the chatter. It's completely nonverbal. Affectionate touch. People who care the most about us use touch as one of the most basic tools we have to help them change their internal dialogue. Language is a part of our ability to control our emotions from the moment we leave the womb. Our caregivers use physical contact to calm us from the moment we are born. In research, it has been found that when people feel the welcome, affectionate touch, or embrace of people who are close to them, they often see that as a sign that they are safe, loved, or supported. Relationship satisfaction, a better ability to deal with stress, and less loneliness are all benefits of carrying physical contact from people we know and trust. There is also a part of the brain called the reward system that gets activated. This makes the brain release stress-relieving neurochemicals like oxytocin and endorphins. In fact, one set of studies found that people with low self-esteem were less afraid of death and more connected to others when they were touched on the shoulder for just a split second. It is even more remarkable that even the touch of a teddy bear, or another non-living thing that is comforting, can be good. This is most likely because the brain codes contact with a stuffed animal the same way it codes contact with other people. Indeed, many scientists think that the skin is a social organ. In this way, our contact with other people is part of a nonverbal conversation that can help our emotions. A lot of what we give and get from other people in our daily interactions makes up a lot of comfort for the inner voice. It's getting more and more clear how these techniques work, but it takes a lot of skill and practice to use them with people we care about. Finally, the conversations we have with other people aren't very different from the ones we have with ourselves. They can make us happy or sad. We talk more or less based on how we interact with other people and how they interact with us. It's likely that this has been the case since our species started sharing its problems with each other. We didn't know what was going on inside our minds until recently. People have started to move their relationships to a new place in the 21st century, just like the students at Northern Illinois and Virginia Tech did after their tragedies. This new place is the internet. Whether or not verbal support works, and doesn't work the same way on social media, texts, and other forms of digital communication is a natural question that people think about all the time. While psychology is still trying to figure out this question, we're already getting some hints about what might be going on. Co-rumination through social media can be hard to understand. So in the mid-2010 seconds, my colleagues and I wanted to learn more about it. We asked people who were dealing with an upsetting experience to chat with another person on a computer messaging app. Besides, they didn't know that the other person was an actor who had been carefully trained to get half of the people in the room to keep talking about what they had just said for the other half. He tried to get them to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Sure enough, the people who were made to rehearse their feelings got more and more angry during the talks. They felt bad from the moment they sat down at the keyboard until the moment they left. It was different for the people who the actor helped to zoom out. They stayed calm and collected even after the actor helped them to see farther away, online or off. When we need or give support, we don't usually think about the fact that in reality, the people in our lives are part of a group. What we've been learning is how to use that environment to get the best results for the inner voice. Our surroundings and the people who live there are inseparable. When we use the resources we have available to us in our relationships with other people, the results can be very powerful. But we can use more than just other people to help us improve our own internal conversations. We can also use the environment around us to help us do that. Taking a walk in the fresh air, or even tidying up our living space, can have a big impact on how we talk. These seemingly small actions can have a big impact on how we talk. Outside, it was in 1963 that the Chicago Housing Authority finished work on a huge project on the city's historically black South Side. The Robert Taylor homes were built there. In the history of the world, it was the largest public housing complex. It had 28 16-story concrete towers and a huge group. The Robert Taylor homes were built to stop the spread of slum conditions that were taking over more and more neighborhoods. They were named after a well-known black community leader, an architect who had recently died. It was a shame that the final product didn't honor his memory. The Robert Taylor homes not only added to the citywide structure of segregation that already existed in Chicago, but they also made things even more difficult for the people living there. With gang violence and drugs running rampant in many American cities, the Robert Taylor homes became a well-known example of the same problems. People living there were afraid, sick, and felt like they didn't have a say in their lives. A big, well-known plan to improve the city had turned into another example of urban decline that disproportionately affected African Americans. In the Robert Taylor homes, you didn't have to turn on the TV or read a paper to see how poverty and segregation were hurting the United States of America at that time in history. You only had to leave your apartment. But in the midst of all the crime and commotion in the Robert Taylor homes, a new experiment would soon be taking place. When people applied for an apartment in the Robert Taylor homes, they didn't have a say in which building they would be living in. They were put in a group at random, in the same way that scientists put people in different groups in an experiment. As a result, Many tenants ended up living in apartments that looked out on very different landscapes. They looked out on grass and trees-filled yards. Others looked outside and saw gray slabs of cement. In the late 1990s, Ming Kuo, a newly hired assistant professor at the University of Illinois, took advantage of a unique situation. Ming had short, dark hair, glasses, a warm smile, and a penetrating mind. He wanted to know if the physical surroundings of residents affected how well they could deal with living in a drug and crime-filled area, and he wanted to find out how that might happen. A growing number of studies have shown that people who see more green space are more likely to be resilient. This surprised her. Patients who had gallbladder surgery and were put in rooms that looked out onto a small cluster of deciduous trees recovered faster, took fewer painkillers, and were judged to be more emotionally resilient than patients who had rooms that looked out onto a brick wall. Roger Ulrich, an environmental psychologist, found this out in a particularly interesting study, but it was not clear whether looking at green views would help people deal with the emotional turmoil of inner city life in one of the most hostile places in the United States. As soon as Ming learned about how the Robert Taylor homes assign homes to people, she thought it was a good way to look into how nature affects the mind even more. So, she and her team went to apartments to see what they could find out about them. Take pictures of the areas around 18 Robert Taylor Homes buildings. They then coded each building's view for how much green space was visible from the building's front door. Then they went door to find people to take part in their study. This time, they were looking for female heads of households. It took Ming's team about 45 minutes to figure out how well each person was handling the most important things in their lives, like whether to go back to school, how safe they could keep their homes, and how they should raise their kids. They did this in their own homes. Each person's ability to focus their attention was also measured. They counted how many digits each person could keep and manipulate from a string of numbers, and how well they did. When Ming and her team looked at the data, they found that people who lived in apartments with green views were much better at paying attention than people who lived in buildings that looked out on empty cityscapes. There were other things they did not do when they had to make difficult decisions. They didn't procrastinate and felt that the obstacles they faced were not as bad as they had feared. In other words, their behavior was more positive. Their thinking was calmer, and they were more willing to take risks. What's more, Ming found that the Robert Taylor Homes residents were more positive because they were better able to focus their attention. They thought trees and grass were mental vitamins that helped them deal with the stress they had to deal with. As it turns out, Ming's findings were not a mistake. They were correct. In the years since her study, more green facts have come to light. Scientists looked at data from more than 1,000 people in England who lived there for 18 years and found that people reported feeling less stressed and happier when they lived in cities with more green space. High-resolution satellite images of the Canadian city of Toronto were used to look at how many trees there were in the city. The results showed that having just 10 more trees on a city block was linked to better health for people, which is the same as having $10,000 more in income or being 7 years younger. Finally, a study that looked at the whole population of England who aren't old enough to retire found that people who were exposed to green spaces were less likely to suffer from some of the negative effects of poverty on their health. When you think about it this way, green spaces seem to be great therapists, anti-aging elixirs, and immune system boosts all in one. People might have internal conversations with themselves that are influenced by the places they go in their daily lives. Make smart choices about how you interact with your surroundings, and they can help you control your own thoughts. But before we can understand how this works, we need to know which parts of nature we like. It is because of the force of nature. There is a sense that Ming's work in Chicago with the Robert Taylor Homes didn't start with gallbladder patients. As a scientific husband and wife, they were interested in how the human mind and the natural world work together. when Stephen and Rachel Kaplan, two psychologists at the University of Michigan, came up with this idea in the 1970s. It was very interesting to them. They thought that nature could act as a battery, recharging the human brain's limited attentional resources. This is what they called attention restoration. Is there more to it than people thought? They thought William James, one of the first people to study modern psychology in the United States, made a big distinction about how people pay attention more than a century ago, and that made it hard for people to understand. James put the ways we pay attention into two groups: involuntary and voluntary. The reason we pay attention to something when we don't even think about it is because the thing we're paying attention to has a quality that draws us in right away. If you were walking around a city and saw a talented musician playing on a street corner, you might stop to listen for a while, and then maybe throw some money into the case of the instrument before you kept walking. This is a real-life example. There is a process called soft fascination that has drawn your attention in. Voluntary attention, on the other hand, is all about what we want to do. It shows how we humans have an amazing ability to focus our attention on anything we want, like a hard math problem or a problem we're trying to stop thinking about. As a result, voluntary attention gets tired quickly and needs to be recharged all the time. Involuntary attention, on the other hand, doesn't use up as much of our brain's limited resources. The Kaplans thought that nature is full of soft fascinations, which are things that our minds are drawn to without us even realizing it. Big trees, intricate plants, and small animals are just some of the things in the natural world that make us want to look at them. It's possible that we'll glance at these things, like the musician playing on the corner. We're not paying attention to them like we would if we were memorizing talking points for a speech or driving through a city. Activities like that drain our executive function batteries. But nature does the opposite. It's easy to be absorbed by nature. It lets the neural resources that help us pay attention recharge. The studies that Ming and her colleagues did in Chicago were designed to rigorously test the Kaplan's ideas. And as we've already seen, they found a lot of support for them. Nature's power has been shown in other experiments. Two, when Mark Berman and his team took people into the lab in 2007, they made them do a difficult test that put their attentional abilities to the test. They made them listen to a series of numbers that ranged from 3 to 9 digits long, and then asked them to repeat them backwards. Half of the people then went for a walk in the local arboretum for about an hour. The other half went for a walk on a busy street in downtown Ann Arbor for the same amount of time. Then they came back to the lab. They had to do the attention task again. A week later, they changed the rules. Each person had to go on the walk they didn't go on the week before. Participants' attention test scores went up a lot after they went for a nature walk, but not after they went to a city. They were better at being able to turn strings of numbers and repeat them back to the experimenter. Besides, the results didn't change whether people took walks in the summer or the winter. It didn't matter what time of year it was. The nature walk helped them pay more attention than the city one did. Berman and his colleagues then tried to find the same results in other groups. For example, a study with people who were clinically depressed found that the nature walk helped them think better and make them happier. In another satellite imagery study, more than 900,000 people took part. People who didn't spend a lot of time in nature as kids had a 15% to 55% higher chance of developing mental disorders like depression and anxiety as adulthood. As a result of this, as well as Ming's work in Chicago, it seemed that the benefits of nature were not limited to our attentional reserves. They also took into account our feelings. Nature's effect on human emotions made sense because it's so important to be able to keep your attentions so that you can control your inner voice. Many of the ways we've looked at to get away from things require you to focus your mind. If you can't focus, it's hard to keep a journal, time travel, or adopt a fly-on-the-wall perspective. Furthermore, to be able to change how we think about things that are bothering us, or to change how we think about stressful situations, our executive functions must not be running low. But Ming and other scientists never tried to see if nature could help people stop rumination by itself. When this happened in 2015, it happened at Stanford University in California. Green, quiet Palo Alto is a world away from the noisy, dirty city of Chicago. It does have some busy streets, but not many. Researchers there came up with a way for people to take a 90-minute walk either on a congested street or through a green space next to Stanford University. They looked at people's rumination levels at the end of the study and found that people in the nature walk group reported less chatter and less activity in a network of brain regions that help people think about things. Because I was raised in the city, I think it's important to stop for a while. Human civilization has seen a lot of people move from rural areas to cities over the last 2 centuries. By 2050, an estimated 68% of the world's population is expected to live in cities. There is a lot of people who live in cities and don't get to go outside as much as they used to. If this is you, it's normal to be worried that you're one of them. In the beginning, when I found out about this research, I was not at all happy about it. During the first 28 years of my life, I wondered if living in dense, concrete cities like Philadelphia and New York for the first 2/3 of my life meant I and everyone else who lived in cities like that was going to have poor health. As a good thing, the answer is no. If you want to green your mind, you don't need to be in the middle of the forest. Attention restoration theory. The main idea is that the brain can use nature's subtle perceptual features as a kind of battery for its cells. Well, the visual characteristics that make you want to touch nature don't just work when you're right next to it. They also work when you're not. Through photos and videos, you can get a second-hand look at nature. This also helps you get your attention back. If you look at photos or videos of nature, you can bring nature and its many benefits into your city or any other place. As far as the human mind is concerned, virtual nature is, incredibly, still nature as far as the human mind is concerned. An experiment that was published in 2016 made people stressed out by making them do a task they didn't want to do. In the end, they watched a 6-minute video of neighborhood streets that were different when it came to their green views. At the low end, people watched a video of homes on a street with no trees. At the high end, the video showed a neighborhood with a lot of trees. Those who saw videos with the most views of nature were able to recover from the stress of the speech 60% faster than those who saw videos with the fewest views of green spaces. Despite the fact that most of the research on the psychological benefits of nature focuses on how we see things, there's no reason to think that our other senses don't also play a role. In 2019, a study found that people who heard natural sounds, like rain and crickets chirping, did better on a task that required them to pay attention. Such sonic forms of nature may also be a soft thing that draws people in. People can use nature to care for their inner voices from the outside in. And the more time they spend in nature, the better their health gets. It gives us a guide for how to set up our environments to cut down on noise. And new technology might make it easier to take advantage of the new things that happen. Among other things, Mark Berman and Catherine Schertz have made an app called Retune, which stands for Restoring Through Urban Nature Experience. It looks at the greenness, noise, and crime rate of every city block in the neighborhood around the University of Chicago to come up with a naturalness score. When users enter their destination, the app generates directions that make the walk as relaxing as possible, taking into account things like the number of road crossings and the length of the walk. A natural next step would be to spread the app all over the place. Of course, you don't need the app to make sure you spend as much time outside as possible in your daily life. Make sure you pay attention to the different places you go and change your routes accordingly. As our mind's relationship with nature shows, the physical world can have an impact on psychological processes inside of us, even though nature has a lot of things that make us want to touch them. This is only one way we can get these benefits. It's not just the natural world that helps us control our inner voices. There is another tool that helps us do this. We can also find it at concerts, in museums, and even when we watch a baby learn how to walk for the very first time. Self-shrinkage. Susan Bott's body tingled as she grabbed her paddle and climbed onto the raft. She would spend the following 4 days kayaking down Utah's Green River with 3 other rafts. They'd spend the day admiring the Tawny Canyon cliffs around a roaring bonfire. They would recount the day's events. Despite first impressions, this was no ordinary group of outdoor enthusiasts. Most of the paddlers were combat veterans, including some former firefighters who were first responders on 9/11. Each had responded to an advertisement seeking veterans for a free trip down the Green River to reconnect with nature. But there was a catch. The excursion was a research experiment. Participants had to paddle and fill out surveys. Bott was the odd man out. She wasn't a battle veteran or a firefighter. After 6 years of studying natural resource management at Colorado State University, she felt burned out by the academic ethos of publish or perish, so she got into redevelopment, helping tiny communities thrive. Bott was aware of her luxury in comparison to many Americans, especially her brother, a top intelligence officer serving in Iraq. While some people's rumination derives from actions, hers originated from inaction. She needed a shift. After several years working in the U.S., Bott found work in Iraq with a State Department contractor supporting the new government's efforts to consolidate regional control. She came in Baghdad in January 2007 and spent a year in Ramadi, Iraq's most deadly city according to Time magazine. Worked closely with a small unit of Marines and Army engineers to establish a long-term transition strategy for the future Iraqi administration. Wearing body armor, driving in Humvee convoys, and racing between buildings to dodge sniper fire. She was far from home in Colorado. Bott's new work gave her a feeling of purpose she had been lacking. It also broke her emotionally. She regularly attended memorials for slain coworkers and witnessed work-related tragedies like car bombs, territorial conflict, and assassinations. Carnage became routine. Bott returned to the U.S. in 2010, where she chattered away. The fact that she had lived while so many of her colleagues had not was distressing. In her mind, she replayed the horrors she had seen and the growth of ISIS in locations where she had lately lived and worked. In 2014, she learned that ISIS had beheaded James Foley, an Iraqi journalist she knew well. Against her better judgment, she saw the ISIS decapitation video. She was never the same. Then she saw the rafting commercial. Bott completed a short questionnaire the night following their first day on the lake, rating her pleasant sentiments. Scientists hope to utilize the paddler's emotions to better understand the impact of the frequent but understudied emotional experience of wonder. Our sense of wonder, when confronted by something powerful and mysterious, it often floods us when we see an amazing sunset, mile-high mountain top, or stunning landscape. Awe is a self-transcendent emotion that permits people to think and feel beyond themselves. This is represented in the brain during amazing experiences. Self-immersion reduces neuronal activity, similar to how the brain responds to meditation or psychedelics like LSD, which are infamous for obscuring a person's sense of self and the surrounding world. But awe isn't just reserved for nature and the great outdoors. A performance by Bruce Springsteen, a poem by Emily Dickinson, or a visit to the Louvre's Mona Lisa can trigger it. Others may be moved to tears when they witness something amazing in person, such as a high-stakes sporting event, or a legendary object such as the U.S. Constitution, or something more intimate, such as a baby's first steps, according to evolutionary psychologists. Humans evolved this emotion to help us bond with others and achieve loftier goals by diminishing our self-interest. The Berkeley crew wasn't just interested in whether rafting down raging rapids would inspire awe. They expected it. They wanted to discover if the trip's astonishment had any lasting effects on their stress and well-being. Anderson requested the rafters to fill out questionnaires about their health, stress, and PTSD before and after the trip. Since then, much had changed. In addition to rafting for dozens of kilometers over 4 days, they hiked along the riverbanks and looked at prehistoric petroglyphs, pondering the lost societies that once walked the same path they travel now. Will the consequences of these trips disappear or leave something behind? After the trip, participants' stress and PTSD levels decreased, while their general levels of enjoyment, satisfaction with life, and sense of belonging increased. Those were intriguing results. The most intriguing finding was what predicted them. It wasn't a matter of how much fun, contentment, appreciation, joy, or pride paddlers felt on each day of the rafting trip. Anderson and his colleagues predicted. It felt awe-inspiring. Susan recognized these benefits, including a calmer inner voice. That rafting adventure altered my life. She said 2 years later, it's difficult to believe that you and your inner voice are the center of the universe when you're surrounded by vastness and indescribability in a similar way to previous distancing strategies. This modifies the synaptic flow of your thoughts. No visual exercise or reframing an upsetting event required for awe. Having the experience, whatever it is, brings relief. It's not just your worries that decrease when you are surrounded by breathtaking sights. Research linking awe to physical and psychological advantages such as the Berkeley Green River Whitewater rafting study is gaining momentum. So individuals choose time-consuming but rewarding events like seeing a Broadway musical over less time-consuming but less rewarding ones like buying a new watch when they are overwhelmed by amazement. Says another study. Conversely, amazement has been associated to decreased inflammation. Others can't help but observe the power of astonishment on behavior. The awe-prone persons came across as humbler to their friends. According to one study, with wisdom comes humility and a balanced perspective of strengths and flaws when considering the impact awe plays in our emotional lives. There is one key caveat to keep in mind. Awe-inspiring encounters can elicit positive or negative emotions, depending on the circumstances. Seeing a tornado, a terrorist attack, or believing in a vengeful God are all examples of awful experiences, in the same way that we can't simply explain a gorgeous sunset. These kinds of encounters are regarded awe-inspiring. The distinction is that they are viewed as dangerous. Unsurprisingly, adding a little threat to the situation can make people's heads spin, with its tendency to make us feel smaller. Awe encourages us to give up our inner voice to a larger grandeur, instead of letting go of control. Our physical surroundings might help us reclaim it. Nadal's Law, achieving his 10th French Open title. Rafael Nadal stepped onto the clay courts in June 2018. They stepped out of the locker rooms ready to compete that June day in Paris with 15,000 fans eager to see a world-class match. Nadal conducted his usual pre-match ritual, a single racket in hand. He crossed the court to his bench in front of the crowd. He ripped off his warm-up jacket, vigorously bouncing on his balls. Then he sat down at his normal spot, with his tournament ID facing up. The game started. Nadal won the first set quickly. At the end of each point, he rearranged his hair and shirt before serving. On his way back from the court, he stopped to consume a power drink and a glass of water. He overcame theme in 2 sets to win the French Open, the most important components of professional tennis. According to Nadal, are competing against world-class competitors and avoiding injuries. It's hard to hush the whispers in my head. He admits, in fact, his strange court mannerisms are a completely legitimate way for him to do so. Adel uses compensatory control to create order in his physical environment, which he wants internally. He places his ID face-up, aligns his water bottles properly in front of his bench, and meticulously styles his hair before serving. For him, it's a means of arranging his environment to match his mental state. And it's not just when we're being evaluated that we do this. It encompasses all of our surroundings. Because of this, humans utilize a number of methods to organize their surroundings, and thus, their minds. Some are like Raphael Nadel's. The life-changing magic of tidying up by Marie Kondo has a global impact by imposing order on the environment. Her decluttering concept influences our feelings. But how does our environment affect our thoughts? That we have the power to change the world in the manner we want is critical to answering this question. It's a powerful human drive to be in charge of one's own destiny. Perceiving ourselves as able to control our destiny determines how hard we work to achieve goals and how long we persevere when faced with obstacles. Given this, it's no surprise that boosting people's sense of control has been related to greater physical and emotional health, academic and work performance, and interpersonal relationships. Excessive speech occurs when we feel out of control. That's when our physical surroundings come into play. Your actions must have the desired effect on the environment around you if you want to actually feel in control. Understanding that there is order in the world is reassuring. Unrealistic patterns and visuals were seen by participants in one study after recalling a chatter-inducing situation. In the absence of other options, their imaginations conjured up the patterns to simulate order. The participants had to choose between a water lily postcard with a black border that conveyed structure and one without. They favored the one with a structured border, another visual cue for order. On average, we can create a feeling of order in the world, and so in our own minds, by organizing our surrounds and ensuring that they follow a predictable pattern. In fact, it doesn't even have to be about the topic that's causing our inner voice to go haywire. And it's easy to impose order on our surroundings, and the benefits of doing so are astounding. For example, reading about a peaceful environment lowered anxiety in one study, presumably because of the disorder they see in their environment. Persons who live in less affluent neighborhoods, like Chicago's Robert Taylor homes and likely Iraq's places where Susan Bott worked, experience more despair. According to study, excessive attempts to organize one's environment are now considered pathological by many. Consider an OCD subtype that is driven to order things. So, these people may simply be exploiting the overwhelming urge to impose order in their surroundings, to obtain a sense of control. Their actions are logical, if not restrained. The overwhelming demand for order in the surroundings that OCD sufferers exhibit interferes with their regular daily functioning is what makes OCD harmful. A psychological disorder. A similar situation occurs in our bigger social environments. Consider the recent explosion of conspiracy theories online, which credit the current state of affairs to a nefarious and systematic scheme. Conspiracies are frequently incorrect and founded on a dearth of proof. Thus, individuals are seeking for order through story mechanisms. Researchers have found a link between our mental health and our physical needs for order, beauty, and wonder. They belong together. These psychological factors affect how we think and feel, and they are activated by our physical spaces. In addition to understanding our attraction to certain aspects of our surroundings, we now know how to maximize their benefits. The last Robert Taylor home was dismantled in 2007. This once famous icon of urban ruin, segregation, and social dysfunction was to be transformed into a new complex of mixed-income residences, stores, and community spaces. The good, Orderly renovation will undoubtedly inspire those who recall the building's former tenants' crimes and brutality. The original complex's significance still reverberates through Chicago's history and science's history. In this way, it exemplifies the need of actively controlling our surroundings for our own benefit. Despite their power, our surroundings and the things that occupy them provide us with more than just psychological comfort. But, as we saw, with the urge for control, there are specific things we do in our circumstances that can help us tame our inner voices. Our tactics frequently seem magical in their strangeness and power. Another part, mysticism. Maria Therjavon parodies. Age 3. Awoke blind one morning in 1762. Maria Therja, the Holy Roman Empress's daughter, grew up in Vienna and had a pretty happy childhood despite her blindness. She was a natural at the clavichord, a small rectangular keyboard, and the organ. Her brilliance and infirmity drew the Empress's attention and compassion, ensuring she got a pension and the greatest schooling. She was a famous musician by her adolescent years, playing in the most elite salons in Vienna and beyond. Mozart would write her a concerto, but Maria Therja's parents didn't give up on their daughter's vision. Doctors tried everything from leeches to electric shocks on Maria Therja's eyes, but nothing worked. Her vision returned. Worse, the therapies caused her a number of ailments. She had vomited, had diarrhea, headaches, and fainted by the age of 18. Enter Franz Anton Mesmer, a mystery Vienna-trained physician with privileged connections. He claimed to have invented a method of curing a wide range of physical and mental ailments by simply changing the flow of an invisible energy coursing through the universe. Mesmer used magnets and his hands to channel this invisible energy to heal people. This he dubbed animal magnetism. It would be named mesmerism later. Maria Therja began mesmer therapy in 1777. At the age of 18, he stroked her eyes and body with his magnets for months, telling her about animal magnetism and how it would heal her. Her parents, like her, were believers, and her sight mysteriously returned. Slowly, in fits and starts. Initially, she only saw haze. Then she started recognizing black and white objects. Her color sense returned eventually. Even though she couldn't see depth or proportions, she gradually began to see human faces. After all these years, they worried her, especially noses. Her visual world had become foreign, but the change was amazing. She regained her sight. Briefly, Maria Therja's parents had a major falling out with Mesmer, and their sessions ended. Her parents reportedly feared she would forfeit her pension if she fully recovered her sight. Another tale claimed Mesmer and Maria Therja were having an affair. Regardless, their time together was up, and Mesmer left Vienna amid rumors. Maria Therja's vision vanished when her medical master of animal magnetism left her life. But Mesmer's narrative wasn't over. He started a clinic in Paris after leaving Vienna, re-engaging the upper classes. He even treated Marie Antoinette and one of King Louis XVI's brothers. In order to improve his income, Mesmer created a mechanism to increase the number of patients he could simultaneously treat. He told them to crowd around a wooden tub filled with water and magnetized iron shreds, with music playing softly in the background. Patients attached metal rods to the ailment while Mesmer moved around controlling the flow of magnetic energy between rod and patient. Mesmer's therapy success varied greatly depending on the patient. Some persons felt little tingling in their affected areas, while others convulsed, as though experiencing a seizure. Others felt better, but not everyone benefited. Others had nothing at all. In 1784, King Louis had enough of mesmerism. To study Mesmer's techniques, he appointed a royal commission of scientists, headed by Benjamin Franklin, a diplomat living in Paris at the time. The commission was first dubious about Mesmer's allegations. They knew that being entranced has its advantages. They didn't believe in an invisible magnetic force. The commission's inquiry didn't sway them. In one experiment, A mesmerist sat next to a closed door. A mesmer-trained physician used magnetic energy on the opposite side of the door. She wasn't entranced when she didn't know he was there. The woman began to twitch and flail furiously as soon as the doctor entered the room, signaling therapeutic success. Many more followed. Finally, Franklin and his panel produced a devastating review of Mesmer's methodology. Not animal magnetism, they claimed, but the healing power of the human mind. Expecting a specific outcome may produce a favorable outcome, while Mesmer was actually promoting a non-existent force. We now know that he gave the world a rare glimpse into a magical appearing power of belief, and its enormous ramifications for our brains and bodies. In fact, Mesmer had discovered it. He had only given a placebo, worry dolls to nasal mists. Most people will tell you that a placebo is nothing. Placebos are typically thought of as a sugar tablet used in pharmaceutical research to assess a drug's efficacy. In reality, a placebo might be a person, an atmosphere, or even a lucky charm. The fact that placebos can make us feel better despite having no active medicinal components is intriguing. Placebos are used in research to verify if a new treatment or technique has a clear medical effect beyond mere suggestion. This acknowledges the mind's true healing capacity. But placebos aren't often thought of as significant in themselves. As a tool, they have long been understood as such. This is totally irrelevant. Of course, then Franklin got it. Mesmer's benefits to his patients were real, even if animal magnetism wasn't. His timeless insight about the mind's involvement in healing was sucked up by Mesmer's fantastic narrative. This persisted until the mid-20th century, when scientists began to doubt that placebos were nothing more than a study tool. This is an amazing testimonial to the psychological interconnectedness of belief and healing, and a secret backdoor for subduing noise. It is an ancient human custom to imbue items or symbols with magic. The King Solomon's mythological seal is two intertwined triangles thought to ward off evil demons. The swastika was also a lucky charm before it became associated with nazism. When youngsters in Guatemala feel worried, they are given a collection of tiny figurines clothed in traditional Mayan costume called worry dolls. Many develop their own unique lucky charms. For example, Heidi Klum flies with a little bag full of baby teeth and grips it during turbulence, but it helps her. Michael Jordan wore collegiate shorts under his Chicago Bulls uniform. Crystal healing has just become a billion-dollar industry. Placebos are quite prevalent. We would be wrong to dismiss those who value magical objects as naive. It makes sense scientifically. Untold numbers of scientific studies show that simply believing in a placebo, charming object, healing human presence, or particular setting makes us feel better. For example, fewer stomach pains, fewer migraine attacks, and reduced respiratory symptoms for asthmatics, like Mesmer's patients. Some people are naturally more susceptible to placebos than others. However, in some circumstances, placebos can bring great relief. Placebos help Parkinson's patients. In one study, researchers injected a potential new chemical medication into the brains of advanced Parkinson's patients. The goal was that this might boost dopamine production, which is low in the condition. After the operations, the researchers followed up with the patients for 2 years. Initially, the findings were positive. Those who received the injection saw a considerable reduction in symptoms. But there was a catch. The same happened in a sham surgery group that had their brains drilled, but didn't get the injection. A placebo, in this case. Their brains and bodies responded as though they had gotten special treatment. This and other research shows that our minds can be as powerful as modern medicine. What about chit-chat? After all, Mesmer cured patients suffering from hysteria, a term coined to characterize people who couldn't regulate their emotions. Animal magnetism had also aided them. Do placebos help inner voice? In 2006, when I was still in graduate school, and Tor Wager was a new assistant professor at Columbia. We started talking about this over coffee. What if we urged folks to inhale saline nasal spray? He proposed, we'll say it's a painkiller that should help them. We'll also examine their minds. Tor wasn't crazy, but I was suspicious at first. Regardless, we moved forward with the test. As a result, we studied the brains of New York City's heartbroken by measuring participants' brain activity while viewing a photo of the person who dumped them. We identified an intriguing connection between emotional and physical pain, but that was merely the start. Afterward, an experimenter in a white lab coat took them out of the brain scanner and led them to a room in another part of the building. The experimenter shut the door and gave half of them a nasal spray. He told them it was a harmless saline solution that would help improve the clarity of the MRI brain images we were going to take in the next phase of the study. When they were done, they inhaled the spray twice in each nostril and went back to the scanner for a second brain scan. The other group went through the same thing, but there was one big difference. The experimenter told them that their nasal spray had an opioid analgesic drug in it that would make them feel less pain for a short time. The salty spray was our trick. Both groups sucked in the same solution of saline, but half of them thought that if they took a substance, it would make their pain go away. Measurement is done now. Participants who thought they had been given a painkiller said that when they relived their rejection, they were much less upset. People who didn't know they had inhaled a saline solution also had less activity in their brain's social pain circuitry than people who knew they had inhaled a saline solution. We found that placebos can help people who talk too much. Using a spray that doesn't have anything chemically important, and it could be like taking a painkiller for the inside voice. It was both weird and exciting to learn that our minds can make us feel bad while also making us feel better. The findings from our study were in line with other research that found that placebo can help treat a wide range of conditions in which chatter is a big part, like clinical manifestations of depression and anxiety, and in many cases, the benefits don't last for a short time. For example, a big review of 8 studies found that taking a placebo to reduce depressive symptoms helped for a long time. Many people wonder why placebos work so well, because they can have such a wide range of effects. As it turns out, the explanation isn't that amazing at all, and it's not even that hard to figure out. It has to do with something our brains need to do all the time. Expectations. Expectations are high. When Tig Notaro took the stage at the Club Largo Inlay on August 3, 2012, her set quickly became known as one of the best in comedy history. 4 days ago, she found out that she had cancer in both breasts. This was just the end of a long string of bad luck, with pneumonia and a bad breakup. She'd been very sick. Her mother had died in a fall. None of this was funny at all, but she grabbed the microphone and began talking anyway. He said, "Welcome to the evening. Hello, because I have cancer. I can't go to the doctor." Crowds laughed excitedly, waiting for a joke to come out of the story. "How are you?" she asked. "Is everyone having fun?" "I have cancer," says the person who has it. People laughed. Other people gasped. It was a joke that it wasn't a joke. Is making people laugh a good way to get them out of uncomfortable situations? Notaro did just that. This made me very uncomfortable. And this made me very uncomfortable, too. Even so, Notaro managed to walk a tightrope between laughing and crying. She got a lot of laughs from this. For example, she talked a lot about how her online dating life would change now, which made it more important to her. She said, "I have cancer," and she looked very sad. "Serious inquiries only," says the person in charge. 29 minutes into her set, she kept going in this startling, tragic, brave, and hilarious way. This new level of fame and success eventually brought Notaro to a whole new level of fame and success, and thankfully, she beat her cancer. What I find so interesting about it is how it shows how important expectations are in determining how we act. It was clear to Notaro that she could make people laugh even if she was talking about one of the saddest and most talk-worthy topics there is, like death. Just say the right words in the right order, tone, and time. When her expectations were very well thought out. She knew how to do this. She knew this because her expectations were very well thought out. A lot of us live our lives based on expectations. This idea can be extended to show how important expectations are in our lives. A person walks. You get up and move. It's your turn. Now, think for a while about how you can do these things. How do you figure out where to put your foot when you walk, where to run to catch a ball, or how to project your voice when you're speaking to a large group? This is called body language. It's because we always, both consciously and subconsciously, make predictions about what we think will happen next. And our brain makes plans for how it will act. The brain is a prediction machine that is always trying to help us figure out how to get around in the world. To be better at this, we should be able to use our past experiences to help us. And this isn't just about how we act. Also, it applies to how we feel inside our bodies as well. This is where placebos come into play. They are a way to use the power of expectations to change our minds and bodies. You can use this information to figure out how you're going to do over time, especially if the doctor has a lot of medical degrees, wears a white coat, and talks with authority when she tells you you'll feel better. That isn't a joke. Research shows that even small things like whether a doctor wears a lab coat, has acronyms on her name placards, or refers to pills as brand labeled or generic make us think they're better for us. Over the course of our lives, we start to think that certain things and people have an effect on our health. Our bodies are like Pavlov's salivating dogs. When we see a pill, we instinctively think that taking it will make us feel better, even though we don't know what the pill is or how it works. This way of thinking about expectations, and by extension, placebos, isn't even aware of itself. A lot of thought didn't go into it. It was an automatic, reflexive response that came out of the blue. People may be surprised to learn that rodents and other animals, too, respond to placebos through the same automatic way. This kind of response is smart. It gives us a lot of good ideas about how to react quickly and effectively in a lot of different situations. Our conscious thought is also a way that our brains work together to make us do what we want to do. A painkiller makes my head hurt, so I remind myself that swallowing the pill will make me feel better. This simple awareness gives my brain something very important. There are no more doubts about whether the headache will ever go away. What if nothing works? This is so painful. Is there anything I can do? Taking the pill gives me hope that my pain will go away, which changes my internal conversation. The research shows this, too. It turns out that these conscious evaluations are drawn from the same part of the brain where our inner voice lives. In a more simple way, what's going on is that I believe in something. The way I think about things makes me feel better. People tell us things that we later tell ourselves. And we also have experiences that give us ideas. This process builds up an expectation in the brain. We have different beliefs because of the people we know and the things that happen to us. In other words, what's really going on in the brain that allows this magic to happen? It's hard to make the placebo effect happen because our beliefs touch on so many different emotions, physiological reactions, and experiences. There is no single neural pathway that makes this happen. As an example, believing that you won't feel pain is linked to less activation in the brains and spinal cord's pain circuitry. However, thinking that you're drinking an expensive wine can make the brain's pleasure circuitry work more. Even if you think you're drinking a fatty milkshake instead of a healthy one, you'll have less of the hunger hormone ghrelin. In other words, when you believe something, your neural machinery makes it happen by increasing or decreasing the activation levels of other parts of your brain or body that are connected to the processes you are forming beliefs about. This is called neural machinery. There are, of course, limits to the effects of placebos. You can't fully believe your way out of any sickness. The placebo effect is stronger for psychological outcomes, like talking, than physical ones. And we now know that this is true. Many medical interventions add value over and above the placebo effect. Even with these caveats, the power of placebos is both profound and undeniable, even though they can be dangerous. In fact, more and more evidence shows that placebos can boost the effects of some medicines and treatments. However, it's hard to get into the back door of placebos. For one to work, we have to be tricked into thinking that we're taking in a substance or doing something that is actually good for us. Outside of research, where people who take part in studies are usually told that they might get a placebo, lying about that would be unethical. So we're in a situation where we can't lie to ourselves about the medicine we take. This means that in the case of placebos, we have a tool we can't use, but we can't use it. Or maybe we can't. If placebos are all about changing people's beliefs, then what if we could find other ways to change people's expectations that didn't involve lying? Information from trusted sources is a powerful way to get people to do something. If I want to convince you of something that you're not sure about, facts and science are often a good way to do it. When Ted Kaptchuk and his team at Harvard came up with this idea in 2010, they did something with it. They published a study that changed the way the scientific world thought about placebos. In the beginning, they chose irritable bowel syndrome, which is a common condition that has already been shown to be helped by placebos. In the medical center where they were doing their study, Kaptchuk and his team explained to the people with IBS what placebos are and how and why they work. They also showed them how and why they worked. This is how it should have worked. When the participants learned about the placebo pill, their expectations should have changed. This, in turn, should have made their IBS symptoms less severe. And that's what happened, too, over the course of the 21-day experiment. People who learned about placebos and were then told they were taking a placebo had less IBS symptoms and more relief than people who learned about placebos and didn't get any pills. People who knew how a placebo could help their IBS did just that. My lab did its own experiment to see if Kaptchuk's findings would apply to people who have problems with their bowels, as well as people who have problems with their minds. We used the same method and split people into two groups, one of which learned about the science of placebos. If you think a substance will help you, it'll help you, we told them. Then we gave them a placebo, which was a nasal spray. We told them again that if they thought it would make them feel better, it would, too. Next, we showed them images that made them feel bad, like scenes of blood and gore. Participants had agreed to see these images in advance. Sure enough, the people in the placebo group felt less stressed. They also had less emotional activity in their brains after looking at a distressing picture for 2 seconds. There have been a lot of labs that have looked into this in other ways. For example, non-deceptive placebos have been shown to help allergies, lower back pain, ADHD, and depression, among other things. There is still a lot we don't know about how powerful and long-lasting placebo effects can be. But these findings open up a whole new set of ways for people to deal with both physical and emotional pain, and show how powerful our beliefs can be. They also show something else important, which is that culture plays a big part in passing down chatter-fighting practices. We get a lot of our beliefs from the culture we come from, like how we think doctors and Lucky Charms should work, and how we believe in a lot of other superstitious things in our lives. In this way, the families, communities, religions, and other forms of culture that shape us also help us deal with chatter. It's not just beliefs that our cultures pass down to us as magical tools. We also learn how to do things with our hands and feet. They also say that rituals can help. When you fish with sharks, you can feel the magic. It was a good thing that Bronislaw Malinowski did well in World War I, an anthropology student at the London School of Economics who was born in Poland and was 30 years old when he went to New Guinea in 1914 to study the customs of native people. In fact, World War I broke out soon after he got there. People didn't like Malinowski because he was technically on the enemy side. He was a citizen of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was at war with Britain at the time, and he lived there. Meanwhile, New Guinea was part of Australia, which made it a friend of Britain. People in the area decided to let Malinowski keep working, so he couldn't go back to England or home. So he stayed away from the war in the far-off southern hemisphere, where he set out on a journey to learn about culture and how people think. When Malinowski spent 2 years living with the tribes on the Trobriand Islands, an archipelago near New Guinea, he came up with some of his most important work. He lived with the tribes and learned about their way of life. People on the island were dark-skinned, shirtless, and chewed betel nuts, a stimulant like coffee, which made their teeth red. He was different from them because of his high glasses and white clothes and pale white hair. Malinowski, on the other hand, was able to gain their trust and a deep understanding of their traditions, including the magic involved in their fishing practices. For fishing expeditions, the islanders took their fishing spears and nets, jumped into their canoes, and paddled around the island until they found their favorite spots. Their behavior was different when they fished in the shark-infested waters around the island. Before they set off, they gave food to their ancestors, rubbed herbs on their canoes, and said magical spells to protect them. Then, when they were out on the open sea, they said more magical spells. In their language, Killavilla, they said, "I will kick you down. Oh shark, go under the water. Shark, a shark dies off." There was no magic being done by the Trobrianders before going on dangerous fishing trips. They did a lot of complicated choreography to make sure they were ready. This goes beyond the specifics of their tribe. They were doing something that was very practical on an emotional level that spoke to the psychology of people. They were performing a ritual, which is another way to cut down on noise. When people are sad, religious groups tell them what to do, like bathing, burying the dead, and having funerals or memorial services. They are told that putting on their uniform and walking across campus to spin the spurs on the bronze statue of a Civil War general named John Sedgwick will help them do better on their exams at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. The business world is becoming more and more like a place where rituals can be found. When Southwest Airlines changed its logo in 2014 and put a heart-shaped logo on the sides of its planes, pilots started touching it when they got on the plane. This spread through the company, and it was likely a source of comfort for them when they faced the daily, unavoidable risks that come with flight. These are all examples of rituals that have been passed down from generation to generation. You can probably think of a few rituals that you have made up on your own, or that someone else has made up. During his time in the Hall of Fame, Wade Boggs played third base. He fielded 150 ground balls, ran wind sprints at exactly 7:17 p.m., and ate chicken before every game. If that day were the last day of Steve Jobs' life, he would look in the mirror and ask himself if he would be happy with the things that he would do. It doesn't have to be famous people to have weird rituals like this. It was found that most rituals people did after a big loss, like the death of a loved one or the end of an important relationship, were unique. This is what Harvard organizational psychologists Michael Norton and Francesca Gino found in one of their studies. Whether the rituals we perform are personal or group-based, research shows that many people turn to this seemingly magical form of behavior when they're having a hard time quieting their inner voice. Israel did a study on women in war zones during the 2006 Lebanon conflict. The study found that women in war zones who read religious psalms every day had less anxiety than those who did not. For Catholics, reciting the rosary is also a way to calm down. Rituals, too, can help you meet your goals, and they can also be fun. One study found that women who struggled to eat healthily ate fewer calories if they took part in a ritual before their meals. Women who tried to be mindful about their eating ate more calories. Rituals also help people perform well in high-pressure situations like math, exams, and much more fun, but even more chatter-inducing karaoke, which are both fun and stressful. When people took part in a memorable experiment, they sang the epic journey song Don't Stop Believin' in front of someone else. In this case, those who did a ritual before felt less anxious and sang better than those who didn't. A lesson learned. Start to believe in rituals. People need to know that rituals aren't just habits or routines. They're not just things you do. They have a few things that make them different from the more common things that happen in our lives. As a first step, they tend to have a set of behaviors that are often done in the same order. That's not the same as a habit or routine, in which the steps that make up those behaviors can be more loose or change more often. Take a look at one of my daily tasks. As an example, you should do these things when you wake up. Take a thyroid pill because your gland isn't working as well as it should. Brush your teeth and drink a cup of tea. My doctor would prefer that I take my medicine first, but that doesn't always happen. It works better on an empty stomach. Tea sometimes comes first. Some days, I'll brush as soon as I wake up. That's fine. I don't have to keep doing the same things in the same order if I don't do them in the same way. I know that the order doesn't have a big impact on me, good or bad. This time, let's compare what I do every day to what the Australian Olympic swimmer Stephanie Rice does before every race. Her arms swing 8 times. She touches her goggles 4 times, and she presses them again. She touches her cap 4 times. She does this every time. Rice came up with this sequence of actions on his own, and he came up with a lot of other unique rituals as well. Rituals, on the other hand, often don't seem to have any connection to the bigger goal they're trying to achieve. When Rice taps her goggles and cap 4 times, it's not clear how that will help her swim faster. They are also important to her, which leads us to the second thing about rituals. Rituals have a lot of meaning. They are important because they serve a very important purpose, like putting a small rock on a gravestone to honor the dead, dancing in the rain to help grow crops, or taking communion. This is because rituals help us move beyond our own problems and connect us with forces bigger than ourselves. They both help us see things from a new angle and feel more connected to other people and things. There are a lot of ways rituals can help us control our inner voices. They're a chatter-reducing cocktail that affects us in many ways. Rituals can help us focus on something else. They also make a lot of demands on our working memory, which leaves little room for anxiety and negative thoughts from our inner voice. For one thing, they help us focus on something else. This might be why there are so many pre-game rituals in sports. They provide a distraction at a time when people are most stressed out. Many rituals also give us a sense of order because we can control what we do. As an example, we can't control what will happen to our kids as they grow up, and we can only protect them to a certain extent. This is what parents talk about a lot when they're parents. Then, when they're born, we can baptize them or do any of a number of birth rituals that make us feel like we have some control. Because rituals have meaning and connect us to values and communities that are important to us. They also make us feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves. This makes us feel less alone and helps us avoid feeling isolated. This symbolic feature of rituals also often makes us feel awe, which makes us think about things in a different way and lessens how concerned we are with our own problems. The placebo effect is another reason why rituals often work. If we believe they will help us, they do. One of the most interesting things about rituals is that we often do them without even realizing it. An experiment in the Czech Republic found, for example, that when college students were made to feel anxious, they did more ritualized cleaning afterward. Similar findings are found in children. In one experiment, 6-year-olds who were socially rejected by their peers were more likely to do the same thing over and over again than other kids in the study who weren't rejected. I have had personal experience with this kind of ritualism myself. When I was having writer's block, my inner stream of thoughts was filled with doubts about whether I'd ever finish this book. When I went to the kitchen to do the dishes, wiped down the counter, and organized the papers on my home office desk, my wife thought it was weird, but not objectionable, because I usually make messes rather than clean them up. To understand why this ritual helped me get through the pain of writing and the looming deadline, I had to do some research for this chapter. Rituals seem to have come about naturally because our brains are very good at figuring out if we're meeting our goals. For example, if we want to avoid an inner voice that is painfully negative, we need to make sure we're meeting that goal. According to a lot of popular ideas, your brain is set up like a thermostat so that it can tell when there are differences between your current state and what you want to happen at the end. A discrepancy means we need to act to bring the temperature down. So we do. People can also do this by taking part in rituals, which is one way to do this. I want to emphasize that we don't have to wait for our brains to tell us to do rituals when we hear a lot of chatter. It's also possible to do them on purpose. I now do this when I'm stuck at work. My kitchen and home office have never been so clean. There are many ways to do this. One way to deal with stress or chatter is to make our own rituals to do before or after an event that makes us stressed. Experiments show that telling people to do things that are completely unplanned but still have a rigid structure can be good. As an example, when people had to sing Journey's Don't Stop Believin' in a karaoke study, they were asked to draw a picture of how they felt, sprinkle salt on it, and count to 5 aloud. Then they had to roll up the paper and throw it away. This one-time use of a ritual made them better at their jobs. However, rituals that we see people perform in labs are stripped of their cultural significance, which we know has even more benefits because it gives people a sense of awe, connects them with others, and makes them feel like they're above the ground. Rituals can help us deal with chatter when we use them. For example, we can use them in our families, workplaces, and other places we belong in our communities. For example, you might go to a service in your religion, or you might do some of the weird but important things that your family does. On the other hand, I make waffles every Sunday morning for my kids to eat after I work out at the gym. Whether rituals come from somewhere else or how they come to be doesn't really matter. The power of the mind, the power of placebos, and rituals doesn't come from supernatural forces, even though some people think it does. This doesn't mean that these practices aren't good for you. They aren't very good on their own, but they can help us use the chatter-fighting tools we already have inside of us. Because of their power, it's interesting to note that while many people make their own rituals and placebos, the cultures we belong to offer us a wide range of these techniques. Cultural beliefs and practices are often likened to the invisible air we breathe. Many of these beliefs and practices shape how we think and act. Even if you think of culture as a way to give people tools to help them stop talking, you can think of it that way. There is a question: how do we spread this new information and make it part of our culture as a whole? When a student of mine raised her hand in class, I didn't think about this question for very long. The question she asked me changed everything. Why are we only learning now? On the last day of a seminar I was teaching, A student called Ariel said these remarks. For 3 months, I had spent my Tuesday afternoons with 28 University of Michigan undergraduates in the psychology department's basement discussing scientific findings about people's abilities to control their emotions, including inner voice chatter. The pupils' final assignment was to bring questions to class. It was their last chance to clear up any lingering uncertainties before finishing the course and going on to the next part of their lives. Every semester I looked forward to it the most. Every conversation generated fresh ideas, some of which led to new studies. I had no idea when I walked into that classroom on that lovely afternoon that this final session would change my life as a scientist. Ariel raised her hand right away, asking me to call on her first. I complied, although I didn't comprehend her request. "Can you elaborate?" said. "The majority of us will graduate this year," she remarked, despite the semester-long focus on self-improvement and accomplishment. Why didn't someone teach us these things sooner, when we could have used them? After a few classes, you get a feel for the questions, but this was novel. I felt as if I had run into an unknown wall. Classic professor approach. I redirected Ariel's inquiry to the class. Students raised their hands to provide suggestions, but I scarcely heard. I was engrossed in what she had said. In truth, I had no answer. After class, I said my goodbyes and sent the students off into their futures, but Ariel's point stuck in my mind like a splinter. Throughout my career, and that semester, I've met people anxious to escape their inner voice. This makes sense. We all know that idle talk can contaminate our minds and fill us with painful emotions that eventually harm our health, hopes, and relationships. It's reasonable to fantasize about permanently muting your inner voice if you consider it a tormentor. But losing your inner voice is the last thing you want if you want to live a functioning, much alone a wonderful life. While many cultures today celebrate living in the moment, this is not how our species evolved. Not at all. With the inner voice, we evolved the power to maintain our inner worlds throbbing with thoughts and memories, to keep track of our goals and update our personal narratives that underpin our sense of self. We rely on our constant internal talks, mind-blowing inventions, stories, and visions of the future stem from our incapacity to totally leave our imaginations. But we should not simply value our inner voice when it bolsters our feelings. Negative self-talk isn't always a bad thing. However painful, the ability to feel fear, worry, rage, and other forms of emotion is useful in moderation. They energize us to adapt to changes in our circumstances. That is, the inner voice is valuable often not despite, but because of the agony it creates. We suffer for a reason. It alerts us to danger and calls for action. This procedure gives humans a huge survival advantage. Every year, a few people are born with a genetic abnormality that prevents them from feeling pain. As a result, they frequently die young, because they have never felt the pain of an infection, hot water, or a broken bone. They are unaware of their fragility. This phenomenon reflects the necessity of our inner harsh voice. It can cloud our thinking. Yet without it, we would be unable to learn, change, and improve. The fact that I can repeat a failed joke in my mind means I won't disgrace myself or my wife next time. You wouldn't want to live without an inner voice that sometimes irritates you. It'd be like sailing without a rudder. Jill Bolt Taylor, a neuroanatomist who had a devastating stroke, felt curiously elated, but also empty and unconnected. We need the discomfort of internal dialogue. The issue isn't avoiding bad states. It's not to be consumed. That leads me back to Ariel. Why hadn't she learned earlier in life how to reduce full-blown chatter? Of course, she, like us, had numerous ways to regulate her inner voice, but she didn't know how to manage it until she took my class. And Ariel's query made me wonder if we were sharing enough knowledge. My 4-year-old daughter came home crying a few weeks after the lesson. She said a boy in her class was stealing her toys, which bothered her. Ariel's question came back to me as she narrated the events, and I tried to console her, despite my expertise in controlling emotions. My own daughter was struggling. She was only 4, when the neurological circuitry underlying emotional control is still forming. Nonetheless, it bothered me. The tools Ariel felt had been kept from her until she entered my class. I wondered what she and her friends were learning at school. Will my daughter ask a professor the same thing Ariel did 18 years ago? Or she'd inquire, which would make me feel worse. It made me think about the many ways to disconnect, talk to oneself, leverage, and strengthen personal relationships, gain from our circumstances, employ placebos and rituals to harness the mind's potential to heal itself. These strategies were buried inside and around us. While no single tool is a panacea, they can all help cool our inner voice when it gets too hot. But these discoveries didn't seem to be making an impact, so I set to work recruiting a team of like-minded scientists and educators to create a course that could be integrated into middle and high school curricula. We initiated a pilot study in the fall of 2017 after visiting hundreds of educators and scientists across the country. Its goal was to include research on controlling our emotions, including our inner voice, into a curriculum and assess the impact on students' health, performance, and relationships. The Toolbox Project. Our efforts are beginning to bear fruit. In the pilot study, 450 students from a public school in the United States took our Toolbox course. Exciting results. Journaling, detached self-talk, and challenge-oriented reframing were all utilized frequently by students in Toolbox curriculum sessions. Just the beginning. We are soon preparing a much larger study with nearly 12,000 pupils. The Toolbox metaphor doesn't merely define our curriculum. That's what I hope you get from this book. Imagining yourself as a fly on the wall, mentally going through time, or literally shrinking yourself, and your problems is a tool. Distant self-talk. You can communicate to or about yourself without using first-person pronouns. And you can normalize your struggles using the universal you by avoiding co-rumination and striking a balance between providing caring support and helping individuals constructively reframe their difficulties when their emotions cool. We may be an inner voice tool for those struggling with chatter in our lives. We can also help in ways that are unseen, relieving tension and boosting confidence in people's skills. These anti-chatter strategies also apply to our increasingly involved digital lives, albeit there are several online habits to avoid: passive rather than active usage of social media, and acting without empathy. Other tools come from our complex environment. Nature is a true toolbox for our thoughts, full of pleasant and practical ways to restore the attentional tools that help reduce chatter and improve health. I am reminded of the wonder I felt when each of my girls uttered dada for the first time. Similarly, imposing order on our environment can help us feel better, think more clearly, and perform better. Then there's our faith, which is malleable to our favor. Sugar pills, both culturally prescribed and self-created, can boost our health through the neuronal apparatus of expectancy. The mind's ability to heal itself is amazing, in the awe-inspiring, not supernatural, sense. You now know about these tools, but you must create your own toolbox. That's why taming chatter can be difficult. Even when we know the research, science has taught us a lot, but more is needed. We are still learning how the various tactics for controlling chatter work together for different people in different contexts. Why do we prefer some tools over others? We must each identify our most effective tools. Building more organizations and companies where people are protected from burnout. Designing smarter environments that leverage nature and order, and rethinking digital platforms to promote connection and empathy. In summary, changing our internal dialogue can change our lives. When people hear about my father encouraging me to go inside and ask myself the question, as a youngster, they often wonder if I do the same with my children when they are angry. No, it is not. No way. I'm not dad. That doesn't mean I don't talk to my kids about taming their speech. As a dad who wants his kids to be happy, healthy, and successful, I can't think of a more vital lesson to teach them. Things is just how I do it. When they're sad, I give them band-aids and tell them that if they think it will help, it will. I take them for walks in our nearby arboretum when they're upset, and gently remind them to look at the bigger picture when they tell me about their latest playground or classroom spat. When they act irrationally for no reason, I ask them to think what their mother, or I would say to them. They tickle me. One of the things I've learned while writing this book is how important my wife and I are to the conversations our daughters have with them. We are one of their tools, in the sense that we help them talk when they need it, and we make the culture they live in at home. We are shaping their inner voices, just as they are becoming more and more important to us. The things I say to my daughters when they talk too much often help them quiet down. There are times when they roll their eyes like I did with my dad. They don't always do that, though, but over time, I've seen that both of them have started to use many of these practices on their own. They use the different techniques they have at their disposal in their own unique way as they figure out what works best for them and how to use them. In this way, I hope I can help my daughters use the conversations they have with themselves all through their lives to help them grow and become better people. I also tell my daughters and myself that when we're having a lot of chatter, it can be helpful to separate our thoughts from our experiences when we're having a good time. On the other hand, immersing ourselves in the best parts of our lives helps us enjoy them more. One of evolution's best inventions is the human mind. This isn't just because it helped our species to survive and thrive, but also because it gave us a voice in our head that could not only celebrate the best times, but also make sense of the worst times. Listen to this voice, not the noise. In the past, I haven't talked to Ariel. She doesn't know what her question made me think about. After that last class meeting, there was another project. If she reads this book, though, she'll be able to say that. This book is another way to try to get people to talk about the things that science has found, but that haven't yet become part of our culture. In some ways, there are too many Ariels in the world for us to keep track of. People who want to learn more about their minds, how they make noise, and how they can stop it. This book is for them, for myself, too, for you, too. Nobody should have to run around his house at 3 a.m. with a little league baseball bat. There are a lot of tools. Chatter talks about the different tools that can help people solve the problem of getting stuck in negative thought spirals and thinking clearly and constructively. Changing how we think about things can help us control how we talk to ourselves. But one of the main ideas in this book is that there are ways to control our inner voices outside of ourselves. 2. In our relationships and our surroundings. Scientists have found out how these tools work when they are used alone. Then, you have to figure out what works best for you. To help you with this, I've compiled all of the techniques in this book into 3 groups. Tools that you can use on your own, tools that use your relationships with other people, and tools that use your environment. Each section starts with the strategies that are likely to be the easiest for you to use when you hear a lot of chatter. Then, the strategies that may take more time and effort. Tools you can use on your own. It's important to be able to step back from our own minds so we can see things from a wider, calmer, and more objective point of view. Many of the techniques in this section help people do this, but some, like performing rituals and embracing superstitions, work in different ways. 1. Talk to yourself from afar. One way to separate yourself from a lot of chatter is to speak in a different way. In order to work through a difficult situation, use your name and the second person you to talk about yourself. Doing so is linked to less activation in brain networks that are linked to rumination. This leads to better performance under stress, wiser thinking, and less negative emotions. A friend might need your help. You can also imagine what you would say to a friend who was having the same problem as you, and think about what you would say. What would you say to that person? Then apply it to yourself. 3. Think outside the box. Chatter is when we only think about the problems we're having. A natural way to fight this is to look at things from a different angle. To do this, think about how the experience you're worried about compares to other bad things you've been through, how it fits into the bigger picture of your life and the world, and how people you admire would handle the same thing. 4. Think of your experience as a challenge. In this book, one of the main ideas is that you can change how you think about your past. Chatter often starts when we see a situation as a threat that we can't control. Using distanced self-talk or reminding yourself of how you've done well in similar situations in the past can help your inner voice. 2. 5. Make sense of your body's chatter. The physical symptoms of stress, like an upset stomach before a date or a presentation, are often stressful in and of themselves. For example, chatter makes your stomach grumble, which makes you chatter even more, which makes your stomach even more upset. When this happens, remind yourself that your body's response to stress is an evolutionary response that helps you perform better in stressful situations. It's important to tell yourself that your rapid breathing, pounding heartbeat, and sweaty hands are not there to hurt you but to help you deal with a problem. In this step, you should try to make your experience more like the rest. It can be very powerful to know that you're not the only one who has been through what you've been through. There's a language tool that can help people do this. When you think about and talk about bad things, use the word you to talk about everyone. It helps people think about their own experiences from a healthy distance and makes it clear that what happened isn't just unique to them, but is part of human life in general. 7. Travel back in time in your mind. You can also think about how you'll feel in a month, a year, or even longer. This will help you get a better sense of how things will be. When you're having a bad day, remind yourself that in the future, it will be much less bad. Doing so shows that your current emotional state is short-lived. After 8, change the view. As you think about a bad experience, picture the event in your mind from the point of view of a fly on the wall. Because your distant self is feeling this way, try to figure out what's going on inside of it. People who adopt this point of view focus less on the emotional aspects of their experience and more on rethinking the event in a way that helps them understand and come to a close. It's also possible to gain distance through visual imagery by picturing yourself moving away from the upsetting scene in your mind's eye, like a camera pans out until the scene shrinks to the size of a postage stamp in your mind's eye. 9. Make your writing more interesting. For 1 to 3 days in a row, write down your deepest thoughts and feelings about your bad experience for 15 to 20 minutes each day. Really let yourself go as you write down your thoughts. Do not think about grammar or spelling. With time, you can make sense of what you felt in new ways that make you feel better. You can think about what you felt from the point of view of a narrator, which helps. 10. See things from the point of view of a neutral third party. If you find yourself talking about a bad interaction you had with another person or group of people, try to think of yourself as a neutral, third-party observer who is trying to find the best outcome for everyone. We can reduce our negative emotions, quiet our inner voice, and improve our relationships with people we've had bad things to do with, including our romantic partners. 11. Carry a lucky charm or believe in a myth. People who believe that an object or superstitious behavior will help them stop talking often use the brain's power of expectation to achieve that goal. Not only that, but these actions aren't going to help you if you believe in supernatural forces. It's enough to know how they use the power of the brain to heal. Perform the rite. People who follow a ritual, which is a set of actions that have meaning can feel more in control and organized when they're having a lot of chatter. Many of the rituals we do, like silent prayer and meditation, have been passed down through our families and cultures. But performing rituals that you make can be just as good at calming down chatter. Tools that make people do other things. People in our lives can play a big role in how we deal with our inner voices. There are two things to think about when we think about this. First, how can we help others with chatter? Second, how can we get help from chatter? Tools to help people who use chatter. Make sure to take care of people's emotional and cognitive needs when people ask for help with their chatter. They usually have two things in mind. As for their emotional needs, they want support and care, but they also want concrete advice about how to move forward and close the deal so they can move on and get over it. Cognitive needs. It's important for you to meet both of these needs in order to be able to calm other people's chatter. Empathically validating what people are going through doesn't just mean agreeing with what they're going through. It also means broadening their perspective, giving them hope, and normalizing their experience. A conversation with someone can be in person, or it can also be done through texting and other digital means. 2. Give support that isn't visible. When people don't ask for help, giving advice on how to cut down on chatter can backfire. It can make people less confident and less autonomous. But that doesn't mean there aren't still ways to help people when they have chatter and don't ask for help. In these kinds of situations, giving help without people knowing you're doing it is good. Several ways to do this. One way to help is to do things like clean up the house without being asked. There are many ways to help people think about things in a different way. For example, you can talk about how stressful parenthood is in general terms, or you can ask someone for advice, but not say that the questions are meant to help the person in need. My colleague might have trouble connecting with their student. So if we were at a party with other advisors, I might ask the group if they had trouble connecting with their students, and if so, how they did it. 3. Make your kids think they're superheroes. This strategy, which is called the Batman effect in the media, is a way to separate yourself from someone who is having a hard time. It's good for kids who are having a hard time dealing with their emotions. Ask them to pretend they're a superhero or cartoon character they like, and then give them a push to use that character's name when they're in a difficult situation. Doing so helps them get away. 4. Gently touch the part of the body that you want to touch, but respectfully. Putting your hand on someone's shoulder or giving someone a hug makes us aware that we have supportive people in our lives who we can rely on, which is a chatter-free psychological refrain. Affectionate touch also causes the brain to release endorphins and other chemicals that make us feel better, like oxytocin, which makes us feel less stressed. In order for affectionate touch to work, it must be welcome. The 5th thing to do is to be someone else's poison. Other people can have a big impact on our beliefs, including how well we think we can deal with chatter and how long it will last. In this way, you can help the people you're advising by giving them hope that their situation will get better. This changes the people's expectations for how their conversation will go. A board of advisors is a good way to get help. The first step to using the power of others is to find the right people to talk to. They should be able to meet both your emotional and your cognitive needs. People will be able to do this in different ways depending on what kind of chatter you're having. It might be easier for your partner to help you with work problems than for a coworker to help. The more people you can talk to for help with chatter in a certain field, the better. Then, build a diverse group of chatter advisors. People you can turn to for help in the areas of your life where you are likely to have a lot of internal chatter running amok. 2. Look for ways to get physical. You don't have to wait for someone to give you a hug, or a hug that makes you feel good. You can do this on your own, knowing that they can help you. You can try to get them for yourself. You can ask trusted people in your life for a hug, or a simple hand squeeze. As a bonus, you don't even have to touch another person to get these benefits. Putting your arms around a comforting object, like a teddy bear or security blanket, is also good. 3. Look at a picture of someone you love. People who care about us remind us that there are people we can turn to for help when we're feeling down. Seeing photos of people we care about can help us calm down when we're chatting all the time. 4. Do a ritual with other people. Although many rituals can be done on your own, there is often an extra benefit to doing them with other people, like praying with your team before a game or toasting your drinks with your friends the same way every time by saying the same words. Doing so also gives people a sense of support and self-improvement that helps them feel less lonely. 5. Use social media less passively. Voyeuristically scrolling through the curated news feeds of others on Facebook, Instagram, and other social media platforms can lead to self-destructive, jealous thoughts. One way to avoid this is to stop using social media when you don't need to. Instead, use these tools to connect with others at the right time. 6. Use social media to get people to help you. Social media can make people talk, but it also gives you a unique chance to expand the size and reach of your chatter support network. If you use this medium to get help, be careful not to share your negative thoughts too quickly. If you do this, there's a chance that you'll say things that you'll later regret, and that will make people angry. Tools that have to do with the environment. This is the first thing you should do. When we hear a lot of chatter, we often feel like we are out of control. Our thoughts control us, not the other way around. To feel more in control, when this happens, order your surroundings to make you feel like you have more control. A lot of ways can be used to organize your home or office. Tidying up your work or home space, making a list, and arranging the things that are around you are all examples. The best way to get your mind in order is to find your own way of organizing your space. 2. Make sure you spend more time in nature. Spending time in green places helps to replenish the brain's limited attentional resources, which can be used to fight back against chatter. People who talk a lot should go for a walk in an area with trees. That might not be possible for you. If you can't, you can watch nature on your computer, look at a picture of nature, or even listen to a sound machine that makes nature sounds. You can decorate the places where you live and work with plants to make them more pleasant for your inner voice. 3. Look for things that make you feel awestruck. Feeling awe allows us to look at our problems in a new way that puts them into perspective. Of course, the things that make people feel awe are different. For some, it is being able to see a beautiful place. Other people remember when a child did something amazing. Other people might be staring at a piece of art that is very interesting. Find what makes you feel awestruck, and then try to bring that feeling into your own mind when your thoughts start to go off the rails. You can also think about making places around you that make you feel like you're in awe every time you look at them.